Our first story comes from someone who experienced the kind of audacious behaviour that makes you question humanity itself. I was at the local park with my 6-month-old daughter, enjoying a nice afternoon walk. She was sleeping peacefully in her stroller, and I had stopped at a bench to check some messages on my phone. The park was pretty busy with families, kids running around, the usual weekend crowd. This woman, probably in her 30s, was there with what looked like a 2-year-old who was having an absolute meltdown. The kid was screaming, throwing himself on the ground, the whole 9 yards. I felt for her because we've all been there with toddler tantrums, but then something completely bizarre happened. This woman, who I later found out was named Claudia, walked straight over to where I was sitting. Without saying a word to me, she reached into my stroller, picked up my sleeping baby, and started trying to put her screaming toddler in the stroller. I was so shocked that it took me a few seconds to even process what was happening. My baby started crying immediately when she was lifted out, and I jumped up from the bench. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I asked, reaching for my daughter. Claudia looked at me like I was being unreasonable and said, "I need this stroller more than you do. My son is having a hard time walking today, and your baby can just be carried." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This stranger had just picked up my child and was trying to take my stroller because it would be more convenient for her. "That's my stroller and my baby," I said, taking my daughter back. "You can't just take other people's things." But Claudia wasn't backing down. She had already managed to get her toddler partially into the stroller and was trying to buckle him in. "Look, I'm a single mum and I'm having a really hard day," she said. "Surely you can understand that. I'll bring it back when we're done with our walk." I was absolutely stunned by her logic. She was acting like borrowing a stroller was the same as borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbour, except we weren't neighbours and she hadn't asked permission. "No, you need to take your son out of my stroller right now," I said firmly. "This is not happening." Other parents at the park were starting to notice the commotion. A couple of them started walking over to see what was going on. Claudia finally seemed to realise that she wasn't going to get her way, but instead of apologising, she got angry. "Fine, but you're being really selfish," she said, as she pulled her still screaming toddler out of my stroller. "Some people have real problems, you know." She stormed off with her crying child, leaving me standing there, holding my baby and trying to figure out what had just happened. One of the other parents who had witnessed the whole thing came over and asked if I was okay. She said she'd never seen anything like that before, and honestly, neither had I. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about the encounter. I kept wondering what would have happened if I hadn't been sitting right there when she tried to take the stroller. Would she have just walked away with it? Did she really think that was an acceptable way to handle her situation? The whole experience left me feeling violated and confused. I mean, who just takes someone else's baby out of a stroller and tries to replace them with their own child? The level of entitlement was mind-blowing. That story is absolutely insane. The fact that someone would physically remove another person's baby from their stroller and try to claim it as their own is beyond comprehension. Some people really do live in their own reality, where everyone else exists to serve their convenience. I can't imagine the shock of watching that unfold in real time. Speaking of people who think the world revolves around them, this next story involves a neighbour who took property boundaries as more of a suggestion than a rule. I live in a suburban neighbourhood where most of us have decent-sized yards and try to keep things looking nice. I've spent years working on my garden, planting vegetables, flowers, maintaining the lawn. It's one of my favourite hobbies and a great way to relax after work. My neighbour Samir lives in the house directly behind mine. Our yards are separated by a chain-link fence that's about 4 feet high, so we can see into each other's properties pretty easily. He's always been friendly enough. Just your typical neighbour small talk when we run into each other. About 6 months ago, Samir decided to get chickens. He built a coop in his backyard and got about 8 or 10 hens. I didn't mind at first because I figured he'd keep them contained in their coop area, but apparently Samir had different ideas about chicken ownership. One morning, I woke up and looked out my kitchen window to see chickens everywhere in my backyard. They were scratching up my vegetable garden, pecking at my tomato plants and generally destroying everything I'd worked so hard to cultivate. I went outside to try to shoo them back to their own yard, but chickens are not exactly cooperative animals. They scattered in different directions, some flying up onto my deck, others running under my bushes. I walked over to the fence and called out to Samir, who was in his yard watching the chaos. "Hey, your chickens are in my yard," I said. "Can you help me get them back over to your side?" Samir looked at me like I was making an unreasonable request. "Oh, they're fine," he said. "Chickens need fresh air and space to roam around. They'll come back when they're ready." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His chickens were actively destroying my garden, and he was acting like it was no big deal. "But they're tearing up my plants," I explained. "I've got vegetables growing that they're eating, and they're making a mess of my flower beds." Samir shrugged. "That's just what chickens do. It's natural behaviour. You shouldn't try to interfere with nature." This went on for weeks. Every morning I'd wake up to find chickens in my yard. They'd dig holes in my lawn, eat my vegetables, and leave droppings everywhere. I was spending my weekends trying to repair the damage instead of enjoying my garden. The final straw came when I found chicken eggs hidden all over my property, under bushes, behind my shed, in corners of my deck. Apparently, his hens had decided my yard was a great place to lay eggs. I collected about a dozen eggs and walked over to Samir's house with them. "Your chickens are laying eggs all over my property," I said, holding up the carton. "This has to stop." But Samir's response was even more ridiculous than I expected. "Oh, great, free eggs," he said, reaching for the carton. "Thanks for collecting them. You can keep a few if you want." I pulled the carton back. "No, you don't understand. I don't want chickens or eggs in my yard. You need to keep your chickens on your own property." "Look," Samir said, "chickens are natural creatures. They don't understand property lines. You can't expect me to keep them locked up all the time, just because you don't like a little nature in your yard." I ended up having to call the city's animal control department to file a complaint. Turns out, there are actually ordinances about keeping livestock contained on your own property. Who would have thought it took 3 visits from animal control before Samir finally built a proper fence to keep his chickens contained? But even now, months later, I'm still finding random chicken eggs in weird corners of my yard, and my garden has never fully recovered from all the damage they caused. The most frustrating part was Samir's attitude throughout the whole thing, like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting his farm animals destroying my property. That story perfectly captures how some people genuinely believe their convenience trumps everyone else's property rights. The idea that chickens don't understand property lines, so therefore it's not his problem, is peak neighbour logic. At least the city had his back on that one, because that situation could have gone on forever. Now, our next story takes us to a grocery store parking lot, where someone's definition of dibs got really creative really fast. I had just finished a big grocery shopping trip, one of those weekend runs where you buy enough food for the entire week. My cart was completely full, probably $40 or $50 worth of groceries, and I was loading everything into my car in the parking lot. It was a busy Saturday afternoon, and the parking lot was packed. People were circling around, looking for spots, and shopping carts were scattered everywhere. I had managed to snag a decent parking spot close to the store entrance. As I was putting the last few bags into my trunk, I noticed this woman approaching me. She was probably in her 40s, well-dressed, carrying a designer purse. She walked right up to where I was standing next to my cart. "Excuse me," she said, "but I need that cart." I looked at her confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "The cart," she repeated, pointing at my shopping cart that still had a few items in it that I hadn't loaded yet. "I need it for my shopping." "But I'm still using it," I said. "I'm not done loading my groceries." That's when this woman, who I later learned was named Molly, said something that still baffles me to this day. "I called dibs on it," she said matter-of-factly. "I saw you coming out of the store, and I called dibs on your cart. So technically, it's mine now." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process whether she was joking, but her expression was completely serious. "That's not how shopping carts work," I said. "I'm currently using this cart to load my groceries. When I'm finished, I'll return it to the store or the cart's return area. But Molly was not backing down. She actually stepped closer to my cart and put her hand on the handle. "Look, I've been walking around this parking lot for 10 minutes looking for a cart," she said. "All the cart returns are empty, and I saw you first. I called dibs fair and square." I couldn't believe I was having this conversation. This grown woman was trying to apply playground rules to grocery shopping. "You can't call dibs on someone else's cart while they're actively using it," I explained, probably more patiently than the situation deserved. "There are more carts by the store entrance, if you need one." "Those are too far away," Molly complained, "and I shouldn't have to walk all the way over there when there's a perfectly good cart right here that I already called dibs on." Other shoppers in the parking lot were starting to notice our conversation. A couple of people slowed down as they walked past, clearly trying to figure out what was going on. I decided to try a different approach. "Tell you what," I said, "give me 2 minutes to finish loading these last few items, and then the cart is all yours." But Molly shook her head. "No, I need it now. I have a lot of shopping to do, and I'm already running late." She actually tried to grab the cart handle and pull it away from me. I held onto it, creating this ridiculous tug-of-war situation in the middle of the parking lot. "Mom, you need to let go of my cart," I said firmly. "I paid for these groceries, and I have every right to use this cart until I'm finished loading them." A store employee who was collecting carts nearby noticed the commotion and walked over to us. "Is everything okay here?" he asked. Molly immediately turned to him. "This person is refusing to give me the cart that I called dibs on. I was here first." The employee looked confused. "I'm sorry, but that's not really how it works. Customers use the carts for their shopping and then return them when they're done." "But I called dibs," Molly insisted, like this was a legal argument that would hold up in court. The employee glanced at me, then back at Molly. "Mum, there are plenty of carts available by the store entrance. I can walk over and get one for you if you'd like." Finally, Molly seemed to realise that her dibs strategy wasn't going to work. She gave me one last annoyed look and said, "Fine, but this is really poor customer service." She walked away muttering something about how people used to be more considerate, leaving me standing there with the store employee, both of us trying not to laugh. I finished loading my groceries and returned the cart to the proper area, half expecting Molly to jump out from behind a car and try to claim it one more time. That story is a perfect example of adult playground logic gone completely wrong. The confidence with which she argued that calling dibs on someone else's shopping cart was a valid claim is honestly impressive. Some people really do think the world operates according to rules they made up in their heads. Our next story involves family drama that hits a little too close to home, literally. I've been dealing with family drama for years, but nothing prepared me for what my sister Iris pulled at my engagement party last month. I had just gotten engaged to my boyfriend of 3 years, and we decided to throw a small celebration at my parents' house. Nothing too fancy, just close family and friends. I was wearing my engagement ring, which my fiancé had spent months saving for. It's not the biggest diamond in the world, but it's perfect for me and means everything to us. The party was going great until I went to the bathroom and took off my ring to wash my hands. I set it on the counter and completely forgot about it in all the excitement. When I came back out, I didn't even notice it was missing until about an hour later. I started panicking, looking everywhere, under couch cushions, on tables, in the kitchen. My fiancé was helping me search, and we were both getting really worried. That ring wasn't just expensive for us, it was irreplaceable. Finally, my mum suggested I check social media to see if anyone had posted pictures from the party. Maybe I could spot where I'd been when I last remembered having it. I opened Instagram and started scrolling through the photos people had tagged me in. That's when I saw it. My sister Iris had posted a selfie from the party, and there on her finger was my engagement ring. At first I thought maybe it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe she had a similar ring. But when I looked closer, I could see the tiny inscription inside the band that was unique to mine. I found Iris in the kitchen and pulled her aside. "Iris, are you wearing my engagement ring?" I asked quietly. She looked down at her hand like she'd forgotten it was there. Oh, this? Yeah, I found it in the bathroom. I was going to give it back to you, but then I thought it looked so good with my outfit that I'd just wear it for the photos. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had found my engagement ring and decided to wear it as an accessory. It's my engagement ring, Iris, from my engagement party. You can't just wear other people's jewellery without asking. But Iris didn't seem to understand why I was upset. I was being helpful, she said. I kept it safe for you, and now I'm giving it back. What's the big deal? The big deal is that you wore my engagement ring in photos that are now posted online. People are going to think you're engaged. Iris shrugged. So, it's just a ring. You'll get it back. But that wasn't the point. The ring symbolised my relationship, my engagement, my future with my fiancé. Having my sister wear it casually for social media photos felt like a violation of something really sacred to me. I need you to take it off right now, I said. Iris rolled her eyes but finally slipped the ring off her finger. You're being way too dramatic about this. It's not like I was trying to steal it or anything. She handed me the ring and walked away like nothing had happened, leaving me standing there feeling completely violated. The worst part was that several people at the party had seen her wearing it and asked her about it. She'd apparently been showing it off, letting people think she was the one who'd gotten engaged. I spent the rest of my own engagement party feeling uncomfortable and upset instead of celebrating one of the happiest moments of my life. Later, when I confronted Iris about the whole thing, she maintained that she hadn't done anything wrong. She said she was just trying to keep the ring safe and that wearing it was no different from trying on clothes at a store. The comparison was so ridiculous that I didn't even know how to respond. You don't try on other people's engagement rings without permission, especially not at their engagement party. That story's over. The casual way she treated someone else's engagement ring like a fashion accessory is mind-blowing. Some people really have no concept of boundaries or sentimental value. The fact that she let people think she was the one engaged makes it even worse. Moving on to property drama that literally flowed into my monthly bills, this next story involves a neighbour who had some very creative ideas about water usage. I live in a house with a decent-sized front and backyard. I've always taken pride in maintaining my lawn and garden, and part of that routine involves using my garden hose for watering plants and washing my car. My neighbour Travis lives in the house next door, and we've always had a cordial relationship. He moved in about 2 years ago with his family, and they seemed like normal, considerate neighbours. Last summer, Travis decided to get an above-ground pool for his backyard. It was one of those big round pools that holds thousands of gallons of water. I didn't think much of it at first because it was on his property and seemed like a fun addition for his kids. But about a week after the pool was installed, I noticed something strange when I got my water bill. It was almost triple what I normally pay, even during summer months when I'm watering my garden more frequently. I called the water company, thinking there might be a mistake or maybe a leak in my pipe somewhere. They sent someone out to check my meter, and the technician confirmed that I had indeed used that much water. I was baffled. I hadn't changed my routine at all, and I couldn't figure out where all that extra water usage was coming from. A few days later, I happened to look out my kitchen window early in the morning and saw something that made me do a double take. Travis was in his backyard, filling his pool with what looked like my garden hose. I went outside to get a better look, and sure enough, he had taken my hose from where I keep it coiled up next to my house, stretched it across our adjoining yards, and was using it to fill his pool. I walked over to where he was standing by the pool. "Travis, is that my hose you're using?" I asked. He looked up from where he was monitoring the water level. "Oh, hey, yeah, I hope you don't mind. My hose wasn't quite long enough to reach the pool from my spigot, so I borrowed yours. I'll put it back when I'm done." I was stunned that he had just helped himself to my water and my equipment without asking. "Actually, I do mind," I said. "You should have asked before using my hose and my water to fill your pool." Travis looked genuinely surprised by my reaction. "It's just water. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Neighbours help neighbours, right?" "But this is going to cost me money," I explained. "My water bill last month was 3 times higher than normal, and now I know why. You've been using my water to fill your pool." Instead of apologizing, Travis got defensive. "Look, it's not like I'm hurting anyone. Water is a natural resource, and I'm only using what I need." I couldn't believe his reasoning. He was essentially stealing my utilities and acting like I was being unreasonable for objecting to it. "Travis, you need to disconnect my hose right now and use your own water for your pool. This isn't okay." But Travis wasn't ready to give up his convenient water source. "Come on, be reasonable. It'll take me hours to fill this pool with my shorter hose. I'll pay you back for the extra water if it's really that important to you." The fact that he was offering to pay me back proved that he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was trying to make it seem like a normal, neighbourly arrangement. "It's not about the money," I said, though it actually was partly about the money. "It's about you taking my utilities without permission. You wouldn't plug your appliances into my electrical outlets without asking, would you?" Travis finally seemed to understand that I wasn't going to back down. He disconnected my hose and handed it back to me with obvious reluctance. "Fine, but I think you're being pretty selfish about this," he said. "It would have been nice if you could have just helped out a neighbour." He walked away muttering something about how people used to be more community-minded, leaving me standing there with my hose, amazed at his logic. Over an eye on my water usage to make sure Travis wasn't snee the next few weeks, I kept ticking over to use my hose when I wasn't home. Thankfully, my next water bill was back to normal, but the whole experience left me feeling like I couldn't trust my neighbour anymore. Who knows what other utilities or property he might decide to borrow without asking. That story is over. The nerve to run up someone else's water bill for weeks and then act like they're being selfish for objecting is incredible. Treating your neighbour's utilities like community property because water is a natural resource is peak entitlement logic. Now let's head to the movie theatre, where someone's understanding of assigned seating got really flexible, really fast. I had been looking forward to seeing this new movie for weeks. It was one of those big blockbuster releases that sells out quickly, so I made sure to buy my tickets online in advance and even paid extra for premium seats in the middle of the theatre. When I arrived at the cinema, I grabbed some popcorn and made my way to Theatre 7. The previews had already started, but the theatre wasn't completely dark yet. I checked my ticket stub and walked down to row H, seat 12, exactly where I was supposed to be. But when I got there, someone was already sitting in my seat. A woman in her 30s was settled in with a large drink and candy, clearly comfortable and not planning to move. I double-checked my ticket to make sure I was in the right place. Row H, seat 12. This was definitely my seat. I leaned over and spoke quietly, trying not to disturb other moviegoers. "Excuse me, I think you might be in my seat," I whispered, showing her my ticket stub. The woman, who I later learned was named Nina, looked at my ticket, then looked at me, then shook her head. "No, this is my seat," she said confidently. "I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. Nora, I was confused. Maybe I had made a mistake somehow. "Could I see your ticket?" I asked politely. "Maybe we can figure out where the mix-up is." But Nina refused to show me her ticket. "I don't need to show you anything. I know where my seat is, and this is it." The previews were still playing, and I didn't want to cause a scene, but I also wasn't about to give up the seat I had paid extra for. "I'm really sorry, but this is definitely my assigned seat," I said, keeping my voice low. "Row H, seat 12. It's right here on my ticket." Other people around us were starting to notice the conversation. A couple sitting nearby was looking over, probably wondering what the hold-up was. Nina crossed her arms and settled deeper into the seat. "Well, I'm not moving. I got here first, and possession is 9/10 of the law." I couldn't believe she was quoting legal principles about movie theatre seating. This was assigned seating, not a free-for-all. "Mom, that's not how movie theatres work," I explained. "These are assigned seats. Everyone has a specific seat number on their ticket." But Nina was doubling down on her position. "Look, I've been coming to this theatre for years, and I always sit in this general area. I don't pay attention to the specific seat numbers because it doesn't really matter as long as you're in the right section." It's Wishma. That logic made no sense at all. If seat numbers didn't matter, why would the theatre bother printing them on tickets and charging different prices for different locations? By now, the previews were ending and the movie was about to start. I really didn't want to miss the beginning, but I also wasn't going to stand for the entire 2-hour movie. I decided to get an usher to help resolve the situation. I walked back up the aisle and found a theatre employee in the lobby. "I'm having a seating issue," I explained. "Someone is sitting in my assigned seat and refusing to move." The usher, a teenager who looked like he dealt with this kind of thing regularly, followed me back into the theatre. When we got to row H, the usher turned on a small flashlight and asked to see both of our tickets. I handed mine over immediately. Nina reluctantly produced her ticket stub, probably realizing she was about to be caught in whatever mistake she'd made. The usher looked at both tickets under his flashlight, then looked up at Nina. "Ma'am, your ticket is for row K, seat 8, he said politely. "This gentleman is in the correct seat." Nina looked at her ticket, as if seeing it for the first time, then looked around the theatre like she was trying to figure out where row K was located. "But I like this seat better," she said to the usher. "Row K is too far back. Can't I just stay here?" The usher shook his head. "I'm sorry, but these are assigned seats. You'll need to move to your ticketed location." Finally, Nina gathered up her drink and candy and stood up, but not without making her displeasure known. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. Movie theatres used to be more flexible about seating. She shuffled off toward the back of the theatre, leaving me to finally settle into the seat I'd paid for. The usher apologised for the inconvenience and wished me a good movie before heading back to the lobby. I spent the first few minutes of the film trying to shake off the awkwardness of the whole situation, but eventually got lost in the story. During the credits, I noticed Nina walking past my row on her way out. She gave me a look that suggested she still thought I was the unreasonable one in the whole situation. That story is over. The confidence to argue that possession is 9/10 of the law in a movie theatre with assigned seating is genuinely impressive. Some people really think they can just declare their own rules and expect everyone else to go along with it. Our next tale takes us into the realm of unexpected house guests, specifically the 8-legged variety. I had been looking forward to a peaceful evening at home when my friend Leo called and asked if he could swing by to hang out. We'd known each other since college, and he was usually pretty good company. I told him sure, come on over. About an hour later, Leo showed up at my door with what looked like a small travel carrier in his hands. I assumed it was maybe some food he'd brought to share or something he needed to drop off. "Hey man, thanks for letting me come over," he said as I let him into the house. "I brought someone I wanted you to meet." I figured he was talking about a new girlfriend or maybe a friend from work, but when we got to my kitchen, Leo set down the carrier on my counter and opened the lid. Out crawled the biggest, hairiest spider I'd ever seen outside of a zoo. It was easily the size of my palm, with thick black legs and this fuzzy body that made my skin crawl just looking at it. "Meet Rosalind," Leo said proudly, like he was introducing me to his child. "She's a Chilean rose tarantula. Isn't she beautiful?" I backed away from the counter immediately. I'm not particularly afraid of spiders, but having one that size loose in my kitchen was not something I was prepared for. "Leo, what is that thing doing in my house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I thought it would be fun for you to meet her," he said, completely oblivious to my discomfort. "She's really gentle. You can even hold her if you want." The spider was now exploring my kitchen counter, walking dangerously close to where I keep my coffee maker and other appliances. "I really need you to put that back in the carrier," I said. "I wasn't expecting you to bring a pet over, especially not a giant spider." But Leo seemed confused by my reaction. "Why, she's harmless. Tarantulas are actually great pets, much easier to take care of than dogs or cats." "That's not the point," I explained. "You should have asked before bringing it into my house. Some people aren't comfortable with spiders." Leo laughed like I was being silly. Come on, don't be such a baby about it. She's just exploring. Look how curious she is about your kitchen. The spider had now made its way over to my fruit bowl and was investigating my bananas. I could feel my anxiety rising with every step it took. Leo, I'm serious. Please put it back in the carrier right now. But instead of complying, Leo tried to encourage me to interact with the spider. Just touch one of her legs. You'll see how soft her hair is. It's actually really soothing. I absolutely did not want to touch the spider's leg or experience how soft its hair was. No, thank you, I said firmly, and I need you to contain it before it gets somewhere I can't reach it. Leo finally seemed to realize that I wasn't going to warm up to his pet. Fine, but you're really missing out. Rosalind is super social for a tarantula. He gently coaxed the spider back into the carrier and closed the lid. But for the rest of his visit, I kept glancing at the carrier nervously, half expecting the spider to somehow escape and reappear on my furniture. After Leo left, I spent the next hour checking every corner of my kitchen to make sure the spider hadn't left any surprises behind. That story is over. The casual way he released a dinner plate-sized spider onto someone's kitchen counter like it was a normal social introduction is absolutely wild. Some people really don't understand that pets require consent from everyone involved, especially when they have 8 legs and fangs. Speaking of neighbours who make questionable decisions about shared property lines, this next story involves someone who took backyard fire safety as more of a guideline than a rule. My neighbour Gwen moved in about a year ago, and for the most part, we've gotten along fine. She keeps her yard neat, doesn't throw loud parties, pretty standard neighbour behaviour. Our properties share a back fence that's made of wood and probably 20 years old, but it's held up well and provides good privacy for both our yards. Last month, Gwen decided she wanted to install a fire pit in her backyard. I thought it was a great idea, since fire pits can be really nice for entertaining and relaxing in the evenings. I even mentioned to her that I'd been thinking about getting one myself. But when the fire pit was delivered and installed, I realised Gwen had some interesting ideas about proper placement. She had positioned it exactly 3 feet from our shared wooden fence. Not 3 feet into her yard from the fence, but 3 feet away from the fence, meaning the flames would be incredibly close to the dry wood barrier between our properties. I walked over to the fence line and called out to Gwen, who was in her yard admiring her new purchase. "Hey Gwen, congratulations on the fire pit," I said. "It looks great. I was just wondering if you'd considered moving it a little further from the fence. I'm a bit worried about the proximity to all this dry wood." Gwen looked at the fire pit, then at the fence, then back at me, like she didn't see what the problem was. "It's fine," she said dismissively. "Fire pits are designed to be safe. The flames don't get that high." But I could see from where I was standing that any decent fire in that pit would send flames and sparks directly toward the wooden fence posts. "I understand that fire pits are designed to be safe," I said, "but most safety guidelines recommend keeping them at least 10 feet away from any structures or fences. This looks like it's only 3 feet away." Gwen crossed her arms and got defensive. "I checked with the store when I bought it, and they said it would be fine. Besides, this is the only spot in my yard where it fits with my patio furniture arrangement." I tried a different approach. "I'm just concerned about both our properties. If that fence caught fire, it could spread to both our houses." But Gwen seemed convinced that I was overreacting. "You worry too much. I'm not going to build massive bonfires or anything. Just small cozy fires for ambience." That weekend, Gwen had her first fire pit gathering. I could see the flames from my kitchen window, and they were definitely higher than she had predicted. Orange sparks were flying in all directions, and several landed on the fence posts. I went outside and could smell wood smoke, much stronger than seemed normal for a small cozy fire. "Gwen," I called over the fence, "the sparks are landing on the fence. I think the fire might be too big for that location." I could hear her guests on the other side of the fence, but Gwen herself came over to talk to me. "Everything's under control," she said. "I've got a hose right here if anything happens." But having a hose nearby didn't address the fundamental problem of the fire pit being way too close to flammable materials. The next morning, I walked outside and saw several scorch marks on the fence posts closest to her fire pit. The wood was charred and blackened in spots where sparks had landed. I took photos of the damage and called Gwen to discuss the situation. "I can see burn marks on our shared fence from your fire pit," I told her. "This is exactly what I was worried about." Gwen's response was to minimize the damage. "Those are just small marks. They don't affect the structural integrity of the fence." "But they show that the fire is too close to the fence," I explained. "Next time, the wind could be different, or the fire could be bigger, and we could have a real problem." I ended up having to call the city's fire department to ask about regulations for backyard fire pits. It turns out there are indeed requirements about distance from property lines and structures, and Gwen's setup was definitely not in compliance. When the fire inspector came out to look at the situation, he immediately told Gwen that the fire pit needed to be moved at least 8 feet further from the fence. Gwen was not happy about having to rearrange her patio furniture setup, but she finally moved the fire pit to a safer location. She still gives me cold looks over the fence sometimes, like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting our shared property to become a fire hazard. That story is over. Installing a fire pit 3 feet from a wooden fence and then acting surprised when it starts charring the wood is peak neighbour logic. Some people really think safety regulations are just suggestions that don't apply to their specific situation. Our next story takes us to a children's birthday party where someone's understanding of cake ownership got really creative. I was throwing a birthday party for my 7-year-old daughter at our local park. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and I'd spent the morning setting up decorations, organising games, and making sure everything was perfect for her special day. The centerpiece of the whole celebration was this amazing custom cake I'd ordered from a local bakery. It was decorated with my daughter's favourite cartoon characters and had her name written in bright pink frosting. I'd picked it up that morning and carefully transported it to the park in a special cake carrier. About halfway through the party, while the kids were playing on the playground equipment, I noticed this man approaching our picnic area. He was probably in his 40s, well dressed, walking with purpose like he belonged there. He walked straight up to the table where I had the cake displayed and picked up the entire cake carrier. "Perfect timing," he said to me with a big smile. "Thanks so much for picking this up. I was worried I was going to be late." I stared at him in confusion. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" The man, who I later learned was named Andre, looked at me like I was being slow to understand something obvious. "The cake," he said, gesturing to the carrier in his hands. "I ordered this for my daughter's party. I'm Andre Martinez. I called the bakery this morning to see if someone could pick it up for me, since I was running behind." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This stranger was trying to walk away with my daughter's birthday cake, claiming he had ordered it. "That's not your cake," I said firmly. "I ordered that cake for my daughter's birthday party, which is happening right now." Andre looked around at the decorations and kids playing, then back at the cake, like he was trying to piece together what was going on. "But I definitely ordered a cake from Sweet Treats Bakery for today," he insisted. "This has to be it." I pulled out my phone and showed him the receipt I had from the bakery, along with photos I'd taken of the cake when I picked it up. "This cake has my daughter's name on it," I pointed out. "Look at the frosting. It says, 'Happy Birthday, Emma.'" Andre leaned closer to examine the cake through the clear carrier lid. Sure enough, there was my daughter's name, written in pink frosting, along with her age and favourite characters. But instead of apologising and admitting his mistake, Andre doubled down on his claim. "Well, maybe there was a mix-up at the bakery," he said, "but I still need a cake for my daughter's party, and this one will work fine. I can just scrape off the name and write a new one." I was absolutely stunned. This man was suggesting that he could just modify my daughter's custom birthday cake to use for his own child's party. "You cannot take my daughter's birthday cake," I said, reaching for the carrier. "You need to call the bakery and figure out where your cake is." But Andre pulled the carrier away from me. Look, your party is already happening. The kids are playing, everyone's having fun. My party doesn't start for another hour, and I've got 20 kids coming who are expecting cake. The logic was breathtaking. He was essentially arguing that his need for a cake was more urgent than my daughter's right to have her own birthday cake at her own birthday party. Other parents at the party were starting to notice the commotion. A couple of dads walked over to see what was happening. "Is everything okay here?" one of them asked. I quickly explained the situation. "This man is trying to take my daughter's birthday cake, claiming it's his." Andre turned to the other parents, like they might take his side. There was obviously a mix-up at the bakery. I'm just trying to find a reasonable solution that works for everyone. But the other parents looked at him like he'd lost his mind. One of the mums stepped forward. "Sir, you can't take someone else's child's birthday cake," she said firmly. "That's not a reasonable solution to anything." Finally, Andre seemed to realise that he wasn't going to win this battle. He set the cake carrier back down on the table, but not without making his displeasure known. "This is really poor customer service from the bakery," he muttered. "They should have called me if there was going to be a delay." He walked away, presumably to call the bakery and figure out what had happened to his actual cake order. I spent the next few minutes making sure the cake was still intact and hadn't been damaged during Andre's attempted theft. My daughter never knew how close she came to losing her birthday cake to a complete stranger who thought he could just scrape off her name and make it work for his own party. That story is over. The confidence to walk up to someone else's birthday party and try to commandeer their custom cake because you need one too is absolutely incredible. Suggesting he could just scrape off a child's name and make it work for his party takes entitlement to a whole new level. Now, let's venture into family territory, where someone's idea of pet care took a very unexpected turn during what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation. I had been planning a week-long vacation to visit my college roommates in Colorado for months. It was going to be my first real break in over a year, and I was really looking forward to some mountain hiking and catching up with old friends. The only complication was figuring out what to do with my dog, Buster. He's a 4-year-old golden retriever mix, and he's basically my best friend. I'd adopted him from a rescue shelter 2 years ago, and we've been inseparable ever since. I asked my cousin Clint if he could dog sit for the week. Clint lives about 20 minutes away, has a big backyard, and has always seemed to like Buster when he comes over for family gatherings. He immediately agreed and said it would be fun to have a dog around for a few days. I dropped Buster off at Clint's house the morning of my flight, along with his food, toys, leash, and detailed instructions about his routine. Clint seemed excited to have him and promised to take good care of my boy. The vacation was amazing. Colorado was beautiful. I got to reconnect with my friend, and for the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed and stress-free. But when I called Clint on Thursday to check on Buster, something in his voice seemed off. "Oh yeah, Buster's doing great," he said, but he sounded evasive. He's adjusting really well to his new situation. I didn't think much of the word choice at the time. Dogs do need to adjust when they're staying somewhere new. When I landed back home on Sunday evening, I called Clint to arrange picking up Buster. That's when he dropped the bomb. "Actually, we need to talk about Buster," Clint said. "I found him a new family." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What do you mean, you found him a new family?" Clint launched into this explanation about how he'd been thinking about my lifestyle and decided that I wasn't providing the best home for Buster. "You work long hours, you live in an apartment, you don't have a yard," he said. "Buster deserves better than that. So I found this great family with kids and a big yard who were looking for a dog exactly like him." I couldn't process what I was hearing. My cousin had given away my dog to strangers while I was on vacation. "Clint, where is Buster right now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's with the Morrison family," Clint said. "They live about an hour north of here. They have 2 kids who absolutely love him, and he's got 5 acres to run around on. He's much happier there." I was beyond furious. "You gave away my dog without asking me, while I was on vacation?" But Clint seemed to think he'd done me a favour. "Look, I know you're attached to him, but Sometimes we have to make hard decisions for the good of our pets. Buster is going to have a much better life with this family. I couldn't believe the presumption. Clint had taken it upon himself to decide what was best for my dog and my life without any input from me. I want his address, I said. I'm going to get my dog back right now. Clint hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. He's already bonding with the kids. It would be cruel to take him away from them now. I spent the next hour on the phone, demanding the Morrison family's contact information and threatening to call the police if Clint didn't cooperate. Finally, he gave me their address, but not before lecturing me about how I was being selfish and putting my own feelings ahead of what was best for Buster. I drove straight to the Morrison house that night. When I explained the situation to them, they were mortified. They had no idea that Clint didn't have the right to give away the dog. They thought he was a family member who had been asked to rehome a pet due to changed circumstances. The Morrisons were actually really nice people, and their kids had indeed fallen in love with Buster in the few days he'd been there. But they completely understood that he wasn't theirs to keep and helped me load him into my car. Buster was ecstatic to see me and seemed perfectly happy to come home to his regular life in my apartment. When I confronted Clint later, he maintained that he'd been trying to do the right thing. He said he'd been watching how Buster interacted with the Morrison kids and truly believed the dog would be happier there. I haven't spoken to Clint since then, and I definitely won't be asking him to pet sit ever again. That story is over. The sheer audacity of deciding someone else's living situation isn't good enough for their pet and just giving it away to strangers is mind-boggling. Some family members really think love gives them the right to make life-altering decisions for you while you're out of town. Let's shift gears to a gas station encounter where someone's understanding of first come, first served got really aggressive, really fast. I had just finished filling up my car at a busy gas station on a Friday afternoon when I noticed someone pulling up very aggressively behind me. The pump had clicked off, I was putting the nozzle back, and I was about to get my receipt when this woman in a white SUV practically slammed on her brakes right next to my car. Before I could even process what was happening, she jumped out of her vehicle and walked straight toward my gas pump. I was still standing right there, literally reaching for my receipt, when she grabbed the pump handle that I had just finished using. "Excuse me, I'm not done here," I said, pointing to the fact that I was still completing my transaction. The woman, who I later learned was named Ivy, looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "You're done pumping gas," she said. "I need this pump now." I was baffled by her logic. "But I'm still getting my receipt and I haven't moved my car yet. There are other pumps available." Ivy glanced around the gas station and saw that there were indeed several empty pumps, but apparently none of them met her standards. "Those pumps are too far from the store," she said. "I want this one because it's convenient." The convenience factor didn't change the fact that I was literally still using the pump space. My car was positioned right there. I hadn't gotten back in it yet, and the transaction wasn't complete. "Ma'am, you can't just take over a pump while someone is still using it," I explained. "I'll be out of your way in 30 seconds. But Ivy was not interested in waiting 30 seconds. She actually tried to squeeze her SUV into the narrow space between my car and the pump, even though there wasn't nearly enough room. "I'm in a hurry," she announced, as if that gave her the right to bypass basic gas station etiquette. Some of us have places to be. I was amazed by her assumption that her schedule was more important than basic courtesy. She was literally trying to force me out of a space I was actively occupying. "Everyone here has places to be," I pointed out. "That doesn't mean you can cut in line or take over someone else's pump." Ivy rolled her eyes and made this dramatic gesture like I was wasting her precious time. "Fine, but hurry up," she said, tapping her foot impatiently. "I don't have all day." I took my receipt, got back in my car, and drove away, leaving Ivy to finally use the pump she'd been so desperate to claim. As I was leaving, I saw her struggling to maneuver her oversized SUV into the pump space properly, which probably took longer than if she'd just waited for me to finish or used one of the other available pumps. That story is over. The entitlement to try to physically take over a gas pump while someone is still standing there completing their transaction is staggering. Some people really think being in a hurry gives them permission to jump ahead of everyone else. The irony that she probably wasted more time fighting for that specific pump than just using an available one makes it even more ridiculous. Speaking of neighbours with boundary issues, this next story involves someone who decided my driveway was the perfect place for their home security project. I live in a suburban neighbourhood where most of the driveways are pretty close together, but everyone has their own clearly defined property lines. I've been in my house for about 5 years, and I've never had any issues with neighbours or property disputes. My neighbour Miles moved in about 8 months ago, and he's always been really focused on home security. He installed cameras, motion sensors, upgraded locks, the whole 9 yards. I didn't think much of it because everyone has the right to secure their property however they see fit. But last month, Miles took his security obsession to a new level that directly affected my ability to use my own driveway. I came home from work one evening to find a large wooden gate installed across the entrance to my driveway. Not Miles' driveway, my driveway. The gate was clearly new, with fresh wood and shiny hinges, and it had a heavy-duty padlock securing it shut. I parked on the street and walked over to examine this mysterious gate that had appeared on my property. There was no note, no explanation, nothing to indicate why someone had blocked my access to my own driveway. I knocked on Miles' door to ask if he knew anything about the gate situation. "Oh yeah, I installed that," Miles said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "It's for security purposes." I stared at him, waiting for him to explain how blocking my driveway improved anyone's security. "Miles, that's my driveway," I said. "You can't install gates on other people's property." But Miles had a different perspective on property boundaries. "The gate is actually on the property line," he explained. "I measured it carefully, and it improves security for both our houses by controlling access to this area." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even if the gate was technically on the property line, which I doubted, it was completely blocking my ability to park in my own driveway. "But I can't get to my garage," I pointed out. "My car is parked on the street because your gate is locked." Miles nodded like he'd anticipated this concern. "I can give you a key to the padlock," he offered. "That way, you can still access your driveway when you need to." The generosity was overwhelming. He was offering to give me a key to access my own property. "Miles, you can't install gates on other people's driveways and then offer them keys as a favour," I explained. "This gate needs to come down." But Miles was convinced that his security upgrade was benefiting the entire neighbourhood. "Property crime has been increasing in this area," he said. "This gate will deter criminals from using our driveways as escape routes." I'd never heard of criminals using residential driveways as escape routes. But even if that was a real concern, the solution wasn't to block neighbours' access to their own property. "If you're concerned about security, you can install a gate on your own driveway," I suggested, "but you can't block mine." Miles looked genuinely confused by my objection, but that wouldn't be as effective. The gate needs to control access to the whole area to work properly. I ended up having to call the city's code enforcement office to report the unauthorised gate installation. It turns out there are regulations about blocking access to driveways, and Miles' security improvement was definitely not compliant. The code enforcement officer came out the next day and ordered Miles to remove the gate within 48 hours or face fines. Miles was not happy about having to dismantle his security project. He complained to several other neighbours about how property crime was going to increase without his gate system, but I finally got my driveway back, and I no longer had to park on the street, because my neighbour decided to improve security by locking me out of my own property. That story is over. Installing a gate on someone else's driveway and then offering them a key to their own property is peak neighbour logic. The fact that he genuinely thought blocking access to improve security was helping everyone shows how some people can rationalise absolutely anything. Our next tale takes us to a shopping mall where someone's approach to retail exchange got really hands-on really fast. I had spent the afternoon shopping at the mall, hitting several stores and picking up some things I'd been needing for work. By the time I was ready to leave, I had about 4 or 5 shopping bags from different stores. Nothing too extravagant, just clothes and a few household items. I was walking toward the exit when this woman approached me near the food court. She was probably in her late 20s, carrying what looked like 2 shopping bags of her own. "Excuse me," she said, stopping directly in front of me. "I really like what you bought. Would you be interested in trading?" I looked at her confused. "Trading what?" The woman, who I later learned was named Tara, gestured to the shopping bags I was carrying. "Your stuff for my stuff," she said, like it was a normal request. "I went shopping today too, but I like what you picked out better than what I got." I couldn't believe she was seriously suggesting that we swap our entire shopping hauls like we were trading lunch items in elementary school. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in trading," I said politely. "I bought these things because I need them." But Tara wasn't deterred by my lack of enthusiasm for her proposal. "Come on, just take a look at what I got," she insisted, holding up her bags. "I spent almost $300. I bet it's way more than you spent." The amount of money she'd spent didn't change the fact that I had bought specific items for specific reasons and had no interest in whatever random things she'd purchased. "I really don't want to trade," I said, trying to step around her to continue toward the exit. But Tara moved to block my path. "You haven't even looked at what I'm offering," she complained. "How do you know you don't want it if you won't even look?" I was getting uncomfortable with how persistent she was being about this bizarre trading scheme. "Because I bought the things I wanted," I explained. "I don't need to see what you bought because I already have what I came for." That's when Tara tried a different approach. She actually reached for one of my shopping bags and tried to hand me one of hers at the same time. "Just try it," she said, attempting to physically make the trade happen whether I agreed to it or not. I pulled my bags away from her immediately. "Please don't touch my things. I'm not trading with you." But Tara was becoming more insistent. "This is how trading works. You have to actually exchange items. You can't just say no without even considering what I'm offering." I was amazed that she thought she could define how trading worked and then force me to participate. "Trading requires both people to agree," I pointed out. "I don't agree, so there's no trade happening." Tara looked around the mall like she was hoping someone would support her position. When she realized that other shoppers were starting to stare at our conversation, she tried one more approach. "Fine, but you're really missing out," she said. "I got some really nice things and yours look pretty basic." The insult about my purchases was apparently her closing argument for why I should trade my basic items for her superior shopping choices. I walked away while she was still talking about how I was making a mistake by not taking advantage of her generous offer. As I was leaving the mall, I saw Tara approaching another shopper with bags, presumably trying to find someone more willing to participate in her retail exchange program. That story is over. Trying to force a stranger to trade shopping bags in a mall food court like it's some kind of primitive bartering system is genuinely unhinged. The confidence to reach for someone's purchases and try to physically make the trade happen is impressive in all the wrong ways. Now let's head to a hospital, where someone's interpretation of visiting hours included some very unexpected plus ones. I had been in the hospital for 3 days recovering from surgery, and I was finally starting to feel well enough to have visitors. The surgery had gone well, but I was still pretty weak, and definitely not up for entertaining large groups of people. My friend Noel had called earlier in the day to ask if they could come visit during evening visiting hours. I was looking forward to seeing a familiar face and having some company, so I told them, absolutely, come on over. Visiting hours at this hospital were from 6 to 8 in the evening, and visitors were supposed to check in at the nurses' station before coming to patient rooms. It was a pretty standard system designed to make sure patients weren't overwhelmed and that everyone who came in was supposed to be there. Around 7 o'clock I heard a knock on my door. I expected to see Noel, but when the door opened, there were 3 people standing there. Noel walked in first, followed by 2 people I'd never seen before in my life. A guy who looked like he was maybe in his 30s, and a woman about the same age, both dressed like they were heading out for drinks rather than visiting someone in a hospital. "Hey, how are you feeling?" Noel asked, giving me a careful hug. "I brought some friends I wanted you to meet. I was confused and honestly a little overwhelmed. I was recovering from surgery, wearing a hospital gown, and definitely not prepared for what seemed like a social gathering. "This is Marcus," Noel said, introducing the guy. "And this is Stephanie. I met Marcus on a dating app, and Stephanie is his roommate. I thought it would be fun for you to meet them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Noel had brought their Tinder date and his roommate to visit me in the hospital, like we were hanging out at a coffee shop. "Noel, I wasn't expecting multiple people," I said quietly, hoping they'd take the hint that this wasn't an appropriate time for introductions, but Noel seemed oblivious to the hospital setting and my obvious discomfort. "I know, but Marcus was free tonight, and I thought it would be more fun with a group. Plus, Stephanie has some great stories about her job that I thought you'd enjoy." The strangers were now settling into the chairs in my room, like they were planning to stay for a while. Marcus had even brought what looked like takeout food, and Stephanie was asking if I minded if she put her feet up on the bed. "Actually, I'm feeling pretty tired," I said, which was completely true. "Maybe we could do this another time, when I'm feeling better." But Noel interpreted my fatigue as just needing some entertainment to perk up. That's exactly why I brought company. Marcus is hilarious, and Stephanie has been telling us about her dating disasters all week. I watched in disbelief as these three people made themselves comfortable in my hospital room, unpacking food and launching into casual conversation like we were at a party. A nurse came in to check on me and looked surprised to see 3 visitors in the room. "Is everything okay in here?" she asked, clearly noting that I looked overwhelmed. "Actually, I think I need to rest," I told the nurse, hoping she'd help me politely end this impromptu social gathering. The nurse took the hint immediately. "Visiting hours are almost over anyway," she announced to the group. "The patient needs rest for recovery." Finally, Noel and the strangers gathered their things and prepared to leave, but not before Noel suggested they all come back tomorrow to continue getting acquainted. After they left, the nurse came back to check if I was okay. She said in 20 years of nursing, she'd never seen someone bring dating app matches to visit a surgery patient. That story is over. Using a hospital visit as an opportunity to introduce your recovering friend to your Tinder date is absolutely wild. The complete lack of awareness about appropriate visiting behaviour while someone is literally in a medical recovery situation is mind-boggling. Speaking of people who redefine property ownership, this next story involves a neighbour who decided shared postal services meant shared everything. I live in a house that has a standard mailbox at the end of my driveway, the kind that sits on a post with my house number clearly displayed. I've been getting mail delivered there for over 3 years without any issues or confusion. My neighbour Becky moved into the house next door about 6 months ago. She has her own mailbox about 20 feet away from mine, also clearly marked with her house number. The whole street is set up the same way, with individual mailboxes for each property. Last week I noticed something strange when I went to get my mail. There was a piece of tape over my name on the mailbox, and someone had written Becky and Martin Household in black marker over the tape. I pulled off the tape and threw it away, figuring it was some kind of mistake or maybe a prank. But the next day, the tape was back, along with a handwritten note that said, "Shared mailbox, both families." I walked over to Becky's house to ask what was going on with the mailbox situation. "Oh, I'm glad you noticed," Becky said when I explained why I was there. "I talked to the mail carrier and we're going to share your mailbox now. It's more efficient." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "What do you mean, share my mailbox?" Becky explained her logic like it was completely reasonable. "Your mailbox is closer to the street, so it's easier for the mail carrier to reach. Instead of them having to walk to both our mailboxes, they can just put all our mail in yours." The efficiency argument didn't address the fundamental problem that it was my mailbox, not a community resource. "But that's my mailbox," I said. "It's connected to my address and my postal service." Becky waved off my concerns. "Mail is mail. It doesn't matter which box it goes in, as long as we both get our letters and packages." I couldn't believe she thought postal delivery worked like a neighbourhood bulletin board, where everyone just grabbed whatever belonged to them. "Becky, you have your own mailbox right there," I pointed out, gesturing to her perfectly functional mailbox 20 feet away. "The mail carrier can reach it just fine." But Becky had apparently put a lot of thought into this mailbox consolidation plan. "Actually, I'm thinking of converting my mailbox into a planter," she said, "since we won't be needing 2 mailboxes anymore." The presumption was staggering. She'd unilaterally decided that we were sharing postal services and was already making plans to repurpose her own mailbox. "We're not sharing mailboxes," I said firmly. "You need to use your own mailbox for your mail." Becky looked surprised by my resistance to her efficiency improvement, but I already told the mail carrier about the new arrangement. He said it was fine with him. I doubted that any mail carrier would agree to deliver mail to the wrong address just because it was more convenient. But I decided to check with the post office directly. When I called the postal service, they confirmed that mail has to be delivered to the correct address and that neighbours can't just decide to consolidate delivery to one location without proper paperwork and address changes. The next day, I removed Becky's tape and sign from my mailbox again and left her a note explaining that the post office had confirmed we needed to use our individual mailboxes for our respective mail. But Becky wasn't giving up on her consolidation plan easily. She kept putting new signs on my mailbox, and I kept removing them. Finally, I had to call the post office and report the situation. They sent someone out to speak with both of us and confirmed that each household needed to use their own designated mailbox. Becky still occasionally puts tape over my name, but the mail carrier now just ignores her signs and delivers mail to the correct addresses. That story is over. Deciding to take over someone else's mailbox for efficiency reasons and then planning to turn your own into a planter is peak neighbour logic. The fact that she thought she could just inform the mail carrier about her new arrangement and it would become official is genuinely impressive audacity. Now let's venture into weather-related drama, where someone's approach to rainstorm etiquette got really aggressive. I was walking home from work during a sudden downpour that had caught everyone off guard. The weather forecast had called for partly cloudy skies, so I hadn't brought an umbrella or rain jacket. When the storm hit, I ducked into a nearby convenience store to wait it out. After about 20 minutes, the rain wasn't showing any signs of letting up, and I really needed to get home. I bought a small umbrella from the store's limited selection and headed back out into the storm. The umbrella wasn't anything fancy, just a basic black one that cost about $12, but it was keeping me reasonably dry as I walked the 8 blocks to my apartment. I was about 3 blocks from home when I heard someone running up behind me on the sidewalk. I turned around to see this guy approaching fast, getting completely soaked in the rain. Without any warning or conversation, he grabbed the handle of my umbrella and tried to yank it out of my hands. "I need this more than you do," he said, pulling on the umbrella while I was still holding on to it. I was so shocked by the sudden attack on my umbrella that it took me a second to react. "Let go of my umbrella," I said, pulling it back toward myself. The man, who I later learned was named Silas, kept tugging on the umbrella handle like we were playing some kind of aggressive tug-of-war game in the middle of a rainstorm. "You can run to shelter," he argued. "I've further to go, so I need it more." I couldn't believe this stranger was trying to steal my umbrella and justify it with distance calculations. "I bought this umbrella," I said, maintaining my grip on the handle. "You can't just take other people's property." But Silas seemed to think that need trumped ownership when it came to rain protection. "It's just an umbrella. You can get another one." The logic was incredible. He could just as easily get his own umbrella from the same store I'd just left, but apparently it was more convenient to steal mine. "There's a convenience store right back there," I pointed out, even though I was getting soaked during this ridiculous argument. "You can buy your own umbrella." Silas looked back toward the store, then at me, then made his decision. He gave one final hard yank on the umbrella, managed to pull it free from my hands, and took off running down the sidewalk. I stood there in the pouring rain, watching this stranger disappear around the corner with my $12 umbrella, leaving me to get completely drenched for the remaining 3 blocks home. When I finally made it to my apartment, I was soaked from head to toe and had to change into completely dry clothes. The most frustrating part was that he'd probably spent more energy running around in the rain and wrestling with me over the umbrella than it would have taken to just buy his own from the store. That story is over. Mugging someone for a $12 umbrella during a rainstorm and then running away like it's some kind of weather emergency theft is absolutely unhinged behaviour. The fact that there was literally a store selling umbrellas 1 block away makes the whole situation even more ridiculous. Let's move to a baby shower, where someone's understanding of gift opening etiquette took a very hands-on approach. I was hosting a baby shower for my first child, and I'd invited about 20 friends and family members to celebrate. Everyone had been so generous with gifts, and I was really looking forward to the traditional gift opening portion of the afternoon. We'd finished eating, played a few games, and everyone gathered around as I settled into the designated chair with the pile of beautifully wrapped presents. I was excited to see what everyone had chosen and to thank each person individually for their thoughtfulness. My cousin Lydia was sitting nearby and she seemed particularly excited about the gift opening process. Maybe even more excited than I was, which should have been my first clue that something was off. I started with the first gift, carefully removing the wrapping paper and revealing an adorable baby outfit from my college roommate. Everyone oohed and ahed appropriately, and I held it up for everyone to see. But before I could reach for the second gift, Lydia had already grabbed it and started tearing off the wrapping paper. "I'll help speed this up," she announced, like gift opening was taking too long and needed to be more efficient. I watched in confusion as my cousin unwrapped a gift that was intended for me to open at my own baby shower. "Lydia, I can open my own gifts," I said, reaching for the partially unwrapped box. But Lydia was already moving on to the third gift. "There are so many presents," she said. "This will take forever if you do them one at a time." I couldn't believe she thought the solution to having received generous gifts was to speed through them, like we were on some kind of unwrapping deadline. "That's kind of the point," I explained. "I want to see each gift and thank the person who gave it." But Lydia had apparently appointed herself as my gift opening assistant and was already working on unwrapping the fourth present. Other guests were starting to look uncomfortable with the situation. The people who had brought the gifts wanted to see my reaction when I opened them, not watch my cousin tear through them like it was Christmas morning. "Lydia, please stop," I said firmly. "I want to open my own gifts." She looked up from the gift she was currently unwrapping, genuinely surprised by my objection. "I'm helping," she said. "This way, we can get through all of them faster and have more time for other activities." I couldn't think of any other activities that were more important than properly acknowledging the generous gifts my friends and family had brought for my baby. "The gift opening is the activity," I pointed out. "That's what we're here for." But Lydia had already finished unwrapping 2 more gifts and was examining their contents like she was the one receiving them. Finally, my mum stepped in and gently suggested that Lydia let me handle my own gift opening experience. "But I was just trying to help," Lydia protested, like she'd been providing a valuable service that was being unappreciated. I spent the rest of the gift opening process keeping a close eye on Lydia to make sure she didn't grab any more presents before I could get to them. Several guests mentioned later that they'd never seen someone try to take over gift opening at someone else's shower. That story's over. Hijacking the gift opening at someone else's baby shower because you think it's taking too long is peak family logic. My neighbour tried to run a yard sale using my stuff. I work from home most days, but last Saturday I had to drive across town for a client meeting that ended up taking way longer than expected. When I left that morning around 9, everything in my neighbourhood seemed normal. My neighbour Tammy was outside watering her plants, like she does every weekend, gave me her usual wave as I backed out of the driveway. I got back home around 4 in the afternoon, and immediately something felt off. There were cars parked all was weird because it's usually up and down our street, which pretty quiet on weekends. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Tammy had tables set up on her front lawn with what looked like a pretty substantial yard sale going on. Good for her, I thought, spring cleaning and making some extra cash. But then I got out of my car and started walking toward my front door, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sitting on one of Tammy's tables, clear as day, was my electric drill. The same drill I'd left on my workbench in the garage. The same drill with the distinctive blue tape wrapped around the handle that I'd put there to mark it as mine when I borrowed it to a friend last year. I stood there for a moment thinking maybe I was seeing things, but no, that was definitely my drill. And as I looked closer at the other items on her tables, my stomach started sinking. There was my toolbox, my extension cords, a box of Christmas decorations I'd been storing, even my camping gear that I kept in the back corner of the garage. I walked over to Tammy, who was chatting with a customer about a lamp that looked suspiciously like one from my living room. When she saw me approaching, she got this weird, guilty expression on her face, like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. "Hey neighbour," she said, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. "How was your meeting?" "Tammy," I said, pointing at the table. "That's my drill." She glanced over at it like she was seeing it for the first time. "Oh, that old thing. I found it in my garage, figured I'd get rid of it." "It was in my garage, Tammy, on my workbench, with my name written on it in Sharpie." The customer who'd been looking at the lamp started backing away, clearly sensing the tension. Other people at the sale were starting to notice our conversation and slowing down their browsing to listen. That's when Tammy doubled down in the most ridiculous way possible. She claimed that when she was watering her plants that morning, she noticed my garage door was open and saw what she thought was a free pile of items near the entrance. She said she figured I was having my own yard sale and was just contributing to the neighbourhood effort by combining our sales. Except my garage door hadn't been open. I always keep it closed and locked when I leave the house. And there definitely wasn't a free pile anywhere near my garage entrance. I asked her to explain how exactly she'd gotten into my locked garage to retrieve these items from what she claimed was a free pile. That's when her story started falling apart. She mumbled something about the side door being unlocked, which was also impossible because that door has been painted shut for years and doesn't even open anymore. Meanwhile, I'm looking around at her sale and realizing she'd managed to sell quite a bit of my stuff already. I could see gaps on the tables where items had obviously been, and when I asked her about it, she admitted that yes, some things had already been purchased. "What things?" I demanded. She started listing items, and with each one, I felt more and more violated. My good socket set, gone to some guy for $20. My camping stove, sold to a family for $15. A box of books I'd been meaning to read, purchased by a woman who'd already driven away. The worst part was that Tammy had priced everything ridiculously low. Items that were worth hundreds of dollars were being sold for pocket change. She'd basically given away my belongings for a fraction of what they were worth. I told her I wanted everything returned immediately, but she argued that some of the sales were already final, that she couldn't just take back items people had already paid for and driven away with. She suggested we could work something out, where she'd reimburse me for the items that had been sold. When I asked her what she thought would be fair compensation, she offered me $40. $40 for hundreds of dollars worth of my belongings that she'd stolen from my garage and sold without my permission. I ended up having to call the police, which created quite a scene since there were still customers milling around the yard sale. The officer who responded listened to both our stories, looked at the remaining items that clearly belonged to me, and told Tammy she needed to return everything immediately and provide a list of what had been sold so we could figure out how to handle restitution. Tammy spent the next hour awkwardly approaching customers who were still at the sale, explaining that there had been a misunderstanding and asking for items back. Some people were understanding and returned things without issue. Others had already loaded purchases into their cars and weren't thrilled about having to unpack everything. In the end, I got most of my stuff back, but several items were gone for good, including my socket set and camping stove. Tammy ended up having to reimburse me for those items, though it took weeks of back and forth, and eventually small claims court to get her to pay fair market value instead of her original $40 offer. The whole experience taught me to always lock my garage and maybe invest in some security cameras. It also taught me that some people have absolutely no shame when it comes to taking what doesn't belong to them and will create the most elaborate justifications for their behaviour. The relationship with my neighbour has been frosty ever since, which is probably for the best. Hard to maintain a friendly wave relationship with someone who literally broke into your garage and sold your belongings at a yard sale. That story is over. That story. The sheer audacity of breaking into someone's garage, stealing their belongings, and then trying to play it off as a neighbourhood yard sale collaboration is absolutely mind-blowing. Some people really do live in their own reality where basic concepts like private property apparently don't exist. Our next tale comes from someone who discovered that workplace refrigerator etiquette means absolutely nothing to certain co-workers. My co-worker put my lunch in the trash to use the fridge space. I work at a mid-sized accounting firm downtown, and like most office buildings, we have a communal kitchen area with a refrigerator that everyone shares. It's not huge, but it's usually adequate for the 20 or so people on our floor who bring their lunch from home. I'm pretty organised about meal prep. Every Sunday, I spend a couple hours making lunches for the entire work week, portioning them into containers and labelling everything with my name and the date. It's a system that's worked well for me for years, helps me eat healthier and saves money compared to buying lunch every day. This particular week, I'd made this elaborate Mediterranean quinoa salad with roasted vegetables, feta cheese and homemade dressing. Took me forever to prepare, but it was delicious and I was looking forward to eating it throughout the week. Monday and Tuesday went fine. No issues with fridge space or missing food. But Wednesday morning, when I went to put my lunch in the refrigerator, I noticed something odd. There were 6 12-packs of soda taking up almost an entire shelf. Not just regular sodas, but those fancy imported ones that come in glass bottles and cost like $3 each. They definitely hadn't been there the day before. The fridge was pretty packed with everyone's lunches, but there was still space. I managed to squeeze my container in without too much trouble and didn't think much more about it. Around noon, I went to get my lunch and it was gone. Not just misplaced or moved to a different shelf, completely gone. I checked every inch of that refrigerator twice, thinking maybe someone had moved it to make room for something else. Nothing. I asked around the office if anyone had seen my lunch container, described what it looked like, even showed people a photo I'd taken of my meal prep on Sunday. Nobody had seen it. One co-worker suggested maybe the cleaning crew had thrown it away by mistake, but that seemed unlikely, since it was clearly labelled and only a few hours old. That's when Miles from the IT department walked into the kitchen carrying one of those expensive sodas I'd noticed that morning. I asked him about the soda situation, whether there was some kind of office party I didn't know about. "Oh, those are mine," he said casually. "Bought them in bulk at Costco. Figured I'd keep them here since my apartment fridge is too small." I explained that I was looking for my missing lunch, described the container again. Miles got this weird expression on his face, like he was trying to decide whether to tell me something. "Was it in a blue container with your name on it?" he asked. "Yes, exactly. Did you see where it went?" That's when Miles dropped the bombshell. He told me he'd thrown my lunch in the trash that morning because it was taking up too much room, and he needed the space for his sodas. I stared at him for a moment, certain I'd misunderstood. "You threw away my lunch?" "It was just sitting there taking up space," he said, like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. I needed room for my drinks, so I made room. I asked him how exactly my one small container was taking up too much room when his 6 12-packs were occupying an entire shelf. He said his sodas were more important because he'd spent more money on them and they needed to stay cold. The logic was so twisted, I didn't even know how to respond. I pointed out that my lunch was my actual meal for the day, that I now had nothing to eat, and that he'd literally stolen my food and thrown it in the garbage. Miles shrugged and said I could just go buy something from the cafeteria downstairs, that it wasn't a big deal. When I told him the cafeteria was expensive and I'd specifically brought lunch to save money, he suggested I should have put my name on it more clearly. I did put my name on it. You just said you saw my name on the container. Well, you should have made it more obvious that you didn't want anyone touching it. I was getting more frustrated by the minute. I explained that putting your name on food in a shared refrigerator is the universal signal that it belongs to someone and shouldn't be touched. I asked him what he thought names on food containers were for, if not to indicate ownership. Miles said he thought the names were just for identification purposes in case something spilled or went bad, not necessarily to claim ownership. He seemed genuinely confused by the concept that labelled food in a shared fridge belonged to specific people. At this point, other co-workers were starting to gather around our conversation, drawn by the increasingly heated discussion. When they heard what had happened, the consensus was unanimous that Miles had crossed a major line. Our office manager, Patricia, happened to walk into the kitchen during this discussion. When she heard the situation, she was appalled. She explained to Miles that throwing away other people's food to make room for your personal beverages was completely unacceptable and violated basic workplace courtesy. Miles argued that the fridge was first come, first served, that he'd gotten there early and claimed the space fair and square. Patricia pointed out that the refrigerator was meant for daily meals, not for long-term storage of bulk beverage purchases. The resolution was that Miles had to remove all his sodas immediately and reimburse me for my thrown-away lunch. He also had to write an email to the entire office apologising for the incident and clarifying that personal food items in the shared refrigerator should never be discarded without permission. Miles was clearly annoyed by this outcome. He spent the rest of the afternoon grumbling about how the fridge policy wasn't clearly posted anywhere, and how he was just trying to optimise space usage. He seemed to genuinely believe he'd done nothing wrong. The whole incident became office legend pretty quickly. For weeks afterward, people would joke about pulling a Miles whenever someone took up too much fridge space. Miles eventually found a mini fridge for his cubicle and stopped using the shared kitchen altogether. The experience taught me that some people have absolutely no concept of shared space etiquette and will rationalise the most selfish behaviour as logical problem solving. It also taught me to never underestimate someone's ability to prioritise their luxury beverages over other people's basic meals. That story is over. Imagine being so entitled that you think your bulk soda purchase takes precedence over someone's actual lunch. The mental gymnastics required to justify throwing away someone else's food because your imported sodas need more room is truly spectacular. Now let's hear about someone who encountered a different kind of space invasion, this time at a bowling alley. Stranger took my reserved bowling lane. Last Friday I decided to celebrate my birthday by going bowling with a few friends. Nothing fancy, just wanted to have some fun and maybe knock down a few pins. I called ahead to Sunset Lanes, our local bowling alley, and reserved lane 12 for 7 o'clock. The woman on the phone took my name, my phone number, and confirmed the reservation twice. She even mentioned that Friday nights get busy, so it was smart that I'd called ahead. I showed up right at 7 with my 3 friends, excited for a good time. We went to the counter to check in, and the teenager working there looked up our reservation, nodded, and pointed toward lane 12. There you go, lane 12 is all yours for the next 2 hours. We grabbed our shoes, picked out our bowling balls, and headed over to our lane. That's when we discovered the problem. Lane 12 was already occupied by 4 people who looked like they'd been there for a while. They had drinks, snacks, personal items spread across the seating area, and were clearly settled in for the long haul. I figured there must have been some mistake, so I walked over to the woman who seemed to be leading their group. She was probably in her 30s, blonde hair, wearing a bowling league shirt that suggested she took the sport pretty seriously. "Excuse me," I said politely. "I think there might be a mix-up. I have this lane reserved for 7 o'clock. The woman, who I later learned was named Sophie, barely looked up from chalking her bowling ball. "We're using it," she said flatly. "Right, but I made a reservation. I called ahead and specifically booked this lane for my birthday party." Sophie finally looked at me. and her expression was somewhere between annoyed and dismissive. "I don't see your name anywhere," she said, gesturing vaguely at the lane. I explained that reservations don't typically involve physical name tags on the lanes, that the system is managed by the front desk. I offered to show her my confirmation text message from the bowling alley. "Look," Sophie said, "we got here first, we're already playing and we're not moving. You can find another lane." I glanced around the bowling alley and pointed out that every other lane was occupied. Friday night was busy. Just like the woman on the phone had warned me, there were no other lanes available. "That's not our problem," said one of Sophie's friends, a guy who looked like he'd been drinking for a while. "We didn't see any name on this lane when we got here, so it was fair game." I walked back to the front desk and explained the situation to the teenager working there. He looked confused and checked his computer again. "Yeah, you definitely have lane 12 reserved for 7 o'clock, he confirmed. "Let me go talk to them." The kid walked over to Sophie's group, and I could see him trying to explain the reservation system. Sophie was shaking her head, pointing at their game in progress, clearly arguing that they shouldn't have to move. After a few minutes of discussion, the teenager came back looking frustrated. "They're saying they didn't see any reservation sign, and they're not willing to move," he told me. "They claim they've been here since 6:30, and they're in the middle of a game." I asked him what the bowling alley's policy was for situations like this. He seemed uncertain and said he'd need to get his manager, but the manager was dealing with another issue and might not be available for a while. Meanwhile, my friends were getting restless, and I was getting more annoyed by the minute. I'd planned this evening for weeks, made sure to reserve the lane properly, and now some strangers were essentially stealing our spot and refusing to budge. I decided to try reasoning with Sophie one more time. I walked back over and explained that this was my birthday celebration, that we'd made proper reservations, and that surely they could understand the situation and move to another lane when one became available. Sophie's response was to literally turn her back on me and take her turn bowling. When she finished, she walked back to the seating area and said, "We're not moving. We got here first. Possession is 9/10 of the law." That's when I lost my patience a little bit. I pointed out that possession being 9/10 of the law doesn't apply when someone else has a legitimate reservation, and that what they were doing was essentially theft of services. "Theft of services?" Sophie laughed. "It's a bowling lane, not a court of law. We're playing, you're not. End of story." One of her friends chimed in that maybe I should have gotten there earlier if I really wanted the lane. That 7 o'clock reservations don't mean you get to kick out people who are already playing. The manager finally became available around 7:30, and when he heard the situation, he was clearly annoyed with his staff for not handling it properly. He confirmed that we had a valid reservation and that Sophie's group needed to move. Sophie argued with the manager for another 10 minutes, claiming that they'd never been told about any reservation, that they'd been there first and that it was unfair to kick them out in the middle of their game. The manager was firm but professional. He explained that reservations are binding commitments, that the lane should never have been given to another group, and that they needed to move immediately or face removal from the premises. Sophie's group finally, reluctantly, gathered their things and moved to a lane that had just opened up. But Sophie made sure to complain loudly about how unfair the whole situation was, how paying customers shouldn't be kicked out for alleged reservations, and how she'd never been treated so poorly at a bowling alley. We finally got to start bowling around 8 o'clock, an hour late for my own birthday party. The manager comped us a round of drinks for the inconvenience, and we had a decent time despite the delayed start. The whole experience left me baffled by Sophie's sense of entitlement. Even if there had been some confusion about the reservation, once it was clarified by management, the reasonable response would have been to apologise and move. Instead, she doubled down and acted like we were the ones being unreasonable for wanting to use the lane we'd properly reserved. That story is over. Some people really believe that physical presence trumps actual reservations, like showing up somewhere first gives you permanent rights to whatever you've claimed. The mental gymnastics required to argue that possession is 9/10 of the law applies to bowling lane reservations is truly impressive. Our next story comes from someone who learned that not everyone understands the concept of asking permission before bringing house guests. My friend tried to sneak their dog into my apartment overnight. I've been friends with Declan for about 5 years now, and he's always been the kind of person who pushes boundaries. Not in a malicious way, just someone who operates under the assumption that it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Usually, this manifests in small things like showing up unannounced or borrowing clothes without asking, so I've learned to just roll with it. Last month, Declan texted me around 9 in the evening, asking if he could crash at my place for the night. His apartment building was having some kind of plumbing emergency, and all the units on his floor had been temporarily evacuated. I told him no problem. I've got a couch and he's welcome to stay, as long as he needs. What he didn't mention in that text was that he'd be bringing his dog. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment that has a strict no pets policy. It's clearly stated in my lease agreement, and my landlord has made it very clear that any unauthorised animals on the property could result in immediate eviction. I don't have anything against dogs, but I'm also not about to risk my housing situation for someone else's pet. Around 10:30, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it expecting to see Declan with maybe a backpack and a pillow, but instead he was standing there with a duffel bag and a massive pit bull on a leash. "Hey man, thanks for letting us crash," he said, like the presence of a 70-pound dog was the most natural thing in the world. I stood there, staring at this animal that was now trying to push past me into my apartment. "Declan, you didn't mention you were bringing a dog." "Oh yeah, this is Bruno. He's super well behaved. You won't even know he's here." I explained that I couldn't have pets in my apartment, that my lease specifically prohibited animals, and that my landlord lived in the same building and would definitely notice if there was a large dog staying overnight. Declan waved off my concerns like they were ridiculous. "It's just one night. Nobody's going to know. He'll sleep in your room with me. No big deal." "In my room? Where exactly am I supposed to sleep if you and your dog are occupying my bedroom?" "You can take the couch, it'll be fine. Bruno needs a proper bed because he's got joint issues." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had Declan brought an unauthorised animal to my apartment without asking, but now he was suggesting that I should sleep on my own couch while he and his dog took over my bedroom. I told him this wasn't going to work, that he needed to find somewhere else to stay, somewhere that allowed pets. Declan looked genuinely surprised by my reaction. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm already here, Bruno's already here, it's late, and I don't have anywhere else to go, just this one time." I suggested he could try a pet-friendly hotel, or maybe call another friend who didn't have lease restrictions. Declan said hotels were too expensive, and all his other friends either lived too far away or had roommates who were allergic to dogs. "So I'm supposed to risk my housing situation because you didn't plan ahead?" "You're being dramatic. It's one night. What's the worst that could happen?" I explained exactly what the worst that could happen was, that my landlord could evict me, that I'd lose my security deposit, that I'd have an eviction on my record making it harder to rent in the future. Declan acted like these were absurd overreactions. While we were having this conversation in my doorway, Bruno had managed to wander into my apartment and was now sniffing around my kitchen. I pointed this out to Declan, who just shrugged. "See, he's already making himself at home. He likes it here." That's when I noticed Bruno was not just sniffing around my kitchen, but actively investigating my garbage can. Before I could stop him, he had knocked it over and was rooting through the contents, spreading trash across my floor. "Declan, your dog is destroying my kitchen." "Bruno, no," Declan said half-heartedly, not making any real effort to control his animal. "He's just excited. He'll calm down once he gets settled." I grabbed Bruno's leash and started leading him back toward the door. Declan followed, protesting that I was being unreasonable and that friends were supposed to help each other out in emergencies. "This is an emergency you created by not thinking ahead," I told him. "You knew you might need somewhere to stay, and you knew you had a dog. You should have planned accordingly." Declan argued that it was an unexpected emergency, that he couldn't have predicted the plumbing issue. I pointed out that even in unexpected emergencies, you don't just show up at someone's place with undisclosed pets and expect them to accommodate you. As I was trying to get Bruno back into the hallway, the dog decided he really liked my apartment and started pulling toward my living room. He's a strong animal, and I'm not particularly good at handling dogs, so this became a bit of a struggle. That's when my landlord appeared at the top of the stairs. He'd apparently heard the commotion and come up to investigate. He took one look at the scene, me wrestling with a large pit bull in my doorway, and his expression went from confused to angry. "What exactly is going on here?" he asked. I explained that my friend had brought his dog over without asking, and that I was in the process of sending them away because I knew pets weren't allowed. My landlord looked skeptical, like maybe I was trying to cover up having an unauthorized pet. Declan, instead of helping the situation, decided this was the perfect time to argue his case. He told my landlord that it was just for one night, that Bruno was a good dog, and that surely there could be an exception for emergency situations. My landlord was not interested in Declan's reasoning. He informed us both that the no pets policy existed for good reasons, including liability issues and other tenants' allergies, and that there were no exceptions for any circumstances. He told me that if he saw any evidence of pets in my apartment going forward, I'd be in violation of my lease. Then he looked at Declan and told him he needed to leave the building immediately with his animal. After they left, I had to spend an hour cleaning up the mess Bruno had made in my kitchen, including several items from my garbage that were now chewed beyond recognition. I also had to have an awkward follow-up conversation with my landlord the next day to reassure him that I hadn't been secretly keeping a pet and that the whole incident was a misunderstanding. Declan texted me the next morning complaining that he'd had to sleep in his car with Bruno and that I could have been more helpful in his time of need. He seemed to genuinely believe that I had been unreasonable and that any good friend would have bent the rules for an emergency. The whole experience taught me that some people will create emergencies through poor planning and then expect others to bear the consequences. It also taught me to be more specific when offering help, to make sure both parties understand exactly what's being offered. That story is over. The nerve of showing up with an undisclosed £70 dog and then expecting your friend to give up their own bedroom while risking eviction. Some people really think friendship means other people should sacrifice their basic security for your poor planning. Speaking of workplace boundaries being completely ignored, this next story takes us into truly bizarre territory. My manager held a meeting in the bathroom. I work for a small marketing agency downtown, and my boss Pamela is one of those people who thinks efficiency means cramming as much activity as possible into every available moment. She's the type who schedules meetings during lunch breaks and sends emails at midnight with the expectation that you'll respond immediately. Last Tuesday, we were supposed to have our weekly team meeting at 2 o'clock in the conference room. Nothing unusual about that. We always meet on Tuesdays to discuss ongoing projects and upcoming deadlines. I showed up right on time with my notebook and laptop, ready to discuss the campaign we'd been working on for our biggest client. But when I got to the conference room, it was empty. I figured maybe Pamela was running late, so I waited a few minutes before texting her to ask if the meeting was still happening. She replied immediately, "Yes, bathroom by reception, need to multitask today." I stared at that text for a full minute, trying to figure out what it meant. Was she asking me to meet her near the bathroom? Was there some kind of emergency? I walked over to the reception area, thinking maybe she was dealing with some crisis and needed to brief me quickly before the actual meeting. That's when I heard Pamela's voice coming from inside the women's restroom, clearly talking on the phone about quarterly projections and client deliverables. I stood outside the door feeling confused and awkward, not sure if I was supposed to interrupt or wait for her to finish. After a few minutes, Pamela opened the bathroom door and saw me standing there. "Perfect timing," she said. "Come on in, we can get started." I assumed she meant we were going to walk to the conference room and begin our meeting properly. Instead, she turned around and walked back into the bathroom, leaving the door open and continuing her conversation about marketing strategies. "Pamela," I called after her, "are you suggesting we have our team meeting in the bathroom?" "It's efficient," she replied, from inside one of the stalls. I need to use the facilities and we need to discuss the Morrison account. 2 birds, 1 stone. I stood in the doorway trying to process what was happening. My boss was literally conducting a business meeting from inside a bathroom stall and apparently expected me to participate in this arrangement. I'm not comfortable having a meeting in the bathroom, I told her. Why not? We're all adults here. I can multitask and you can take notes. The acoustics in here are actually pretty good for discussions. I pointed out that bathrooms are private spaces, that other employees might need to use the facilities, and that it was completely inappropriate to conduct professional meetings in restrooms. You're being prissy about this, Pamela said. It's just a room. The important thing is that we communicate about our projects efficiently. While we were having this conversation, 2 of my co-workers appeared in the hallway behind me, looking for the team meeting. When they saw me standing in the bathroom doorway, talking to our boss who was clearly using the toilet, their expressions went from confused to horrified. Is the meeting in there? Asked Kevin from accounting. Apparently so, I replied, feeling my face turn red with embarrassment. That's when Pamela called out from the stall. Great, everyone's here. Let's talk about the Morrison timeline and budget adjustments. Kevin and Lisa, my other co-worker, exchanged glances that clearly communicated their mutual discomfort with the situation. None of us moved from the hallway. Pamela, Lisa said carefully, maybe we should wait until you're finished and then move to the conference room. I'm perfectly capable of discussing business while handling personal needs, Pamela replied. This is about time management and efficiency. Corporate America needs to get over its hang-ups about bodily functions. I suggested that we could postpone the meeting by 15 minutes to allow her to finish her business privately, but Pamela insisted that she had back-to-back appointments all afternoon, and this was the only way to fit everything in. If you're not comfortable coming in, just stand in the doorway and we can project our voices, she suggested. The 3 of us remained firmly planted in the hallway, none of us willing to enter a bathroom for a professional meeting. Pamela continued trying to conduct the meeting from her stool, shouting questions about project deadlines and client feedback while we stood there in stunned silence. The situation became even more awkward when another employee, someone from a different department, approached the bathroom and saw the 3 of us clustered around the entrance having what appeared to be a group discussion. Is everything okay here? She asked. Just a team meeting, Kevin said weakly. The woman looked at us like we'd lost our minds and walked away, probably to find a different bathroom to use. After about 10 minutes of this bizarre arrangement, Pamela finally emerged from the stall and seemed surprised that none of us had actually entered the bathroom to participate in her meeting. You all missed half the discussion, she complained while washing her hands. Because we were having the discussion in a bathroom, I pointed out. And we're all still standing in the hallway, Lisa added. Pamela acted like our reluctance to conduct business in a restroom was some kind of professional shortcoming on our part. She spent the next few minutes lecturing us about adaptability and creative problem solving in fast-paced work environments. We finally moved to the conference room to finish our meeting, but the whole experience had been so uncomfortable that none of us could focus properly on the actual business discussion. The image of our boss conducting meetings from a toilet stall had kind of ruined the professional atmosphere. Later that day, Lisa and Kevin both came to me separately to ask if what had just happened was normal workplace behaviour. None of us had ever experienced anything like it before, and we weren't sure if we should report it to HR or just pretend it never happened. I ended up having a private conversation with Pamela the next day, explaining that bathroom meetings made everyone uncomfortable and suggesting that we stick to traditional meeting spaces going forward. She seemed genuinely puzzled by our objection and kept insisting that bathrooms were just rooms like any other. The whole incident became legendary in our office, though we tried to keep it quiet so word wouldn't spread to other departments. For weeks afterward, whenever someone mentioned efficiency or multitasking, we'd all exchange knowing looks and try not to laugh. That story is over. The complete disconnect between thinking you're being efficient and actually just traumatizing your employees in a bathroom is genuinely impressive. Some people really believe that professional boundaries are just suggestions that can be ignored in the name of productivity. Our next tale comes from someone who discovered that library etiquette is apparently optional for certain people. A stranger tried to grab my book because they needed it more. I love spending Saturday afternoons at the main branch of our public library, downtown. It's this beautiful old building with high ceilings and huge windows, and there's something about the atmosphere that makes it perfect for getting lost in a good book. I usually claim one of the comfortable armchairs in the fiction section and spend hours just reading. Last weekend, I was about halfway through this mystery novel I'd been really enjoying. One of those page-turners where you keep telling yourself you'll stop after one more chapter, but then the chapter ends on a cliffhanger and you have to keep going. I'd been there for maybe 2 hours, completely absorbed in the story. That's when this guy approached my chair. He was probably in his late 20s, wearing a college sweatshirt, carrying a notebook and several pens like he was there to study. He stood next to my chair for a moment before clearing his throat to get my attention. "Excuse me," he said, "but I need that book you're reading." I looked up from my page, a little annoyed at being interrupted during a particularly tense scene. "I'm sorry?" "Yeah. That book," he said, pointing at the novel in my hands. "I need it for a paper I'm writing. It's due Monday, so I kind of need it right now." I glanced at the book, then back at him, trying to understand what he was asking. "I'm reading it," I said. "Right, but I need it more than you do. You're just reading for fun, I assume, but I actually need it for academic purposes." The audacity of the statement caught me off guard. I explained that I had checked the book out properly, that it was due back in 2 weeks, and that I was currently in the middle of reading it. "How much do you have left?" he asked. "I don't know, maybe 100 pages. Julian, as I learned his name was later, seemed to think this information supported his argument. "See, you're not even close to finished. I could read the whole thing tonight and get my paper written tomorrow. You could just check it out again next week." I told him that's not how library books work, that I had legitimately borrowed it and planned to finish reading it at my own pace. Julian looked frustrated, like I was being deliberately difficult. "Look, I really need this book. My professor specifically assigned this title, and the library only has 2 copies. The other one is already checked out and won't be back for a week. I've got a paper due Monday morning that's worth 30% of my grade." I sympathised with his deadline situation, but pointed out that his poor planning didn't constitute an emergency on my part. I suggested he could try interlibrary loan, or maybe find the book at a bookstore, or ask his professor for an extension. "Those aren't options," Julian said. "I need this specific edition because it has different page numbers than other versions, and my citations have to be exact. You don't understand how important this is." I was starting to get annoyed with his assumption that his academic needs automatically trumped my leisure reading. I told him I understood that school was stressful, but that didn't give him the right to demand that other people give up library materials they had properly checked out. That's when Julian decided to try a different approach. He offered to pay me for the book. "How about $20? You let me borrow it for the weekend and I'll give you $20. That's more than the book costs new." I explained that the book wasn't mine to sell, that it belonged to the library, and that what he was suggesting was basically asking me to rent him public library property. $30 then? Come on, you're just reading it for entertainment. I'm trying to pass a class here." Julian's increasing desperation was making the situation more uncomfortable. Other people in the library were starting to notice our conversation, and I could see a librarian at the information desk glancing over in our direction. I told Julian one final time that I was not giving him the book, that he needed to find another solution for his assignment, and that he should probably start working on papers earlier in the future to avoid these kinds of last-minute crises. "You're being really selfish about this," he said, his voice getting louder. "I'm trying to get an education here, and you're just reading some trashy mystery novel for fun. One of us clearly has a more legitimate need for this book." That comment pushed me over the edge. I told Julian that my leisure reading was just as valid as his academic work, that libraries exist to serve all patrons equally, and that his opinion about the literary value of my book choice was completely irrelevant. "Fine, then let me just borrow it for a few hours. I'm a fast reader. I could get through it this afternoon and give it back to you before the library closes. I pointed out that he'd already admitted the book was 200 pages long and that it was currently 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Even if he was the fastest reader in the world, there was no way he could read the entire book, take notes for his paper, and return it to me before closing time. Julian seemed to realise his arguments weren't working, so he tried one last approach. He sat down in the chair next to mine and started explaining his whole academic situation. He was a graduate student in English literature. This was his thesis advisors class. His entire future career depended on maintaining a high GPA. His parents were paying for school and would be devastated if he failed. I get that you want to finish your book, he said, but this is literally about my entire future. Can't you just be understanding about this? I told him I was sorry about his stressful situation, but that it still didn't entitle him to take library materials away from other patrons. I suggested he speak with a librarian about possible solutions. Maybe they could help him find alternative resources or contact other branches to see if the book was available elsewhere. Julian looked at the librarian I'd pointed toward, then back at me. She's just going to tell me the same thing you're telling me, that I should have planned better. Maybe because that's true. He sat there for another few minutes, apparently hoping I'd change my mind. When it became clear that I wasn't going to hand over the book, he finally got up and walked away, muttering something about selfish people and the decline of community cooperation. I watched him approach the librarian's desk, presumably to ask about other copies or alternative solutions. The librarian spent several minutes with him, checking the computer system and making phone calls to other branches. Eventually, Julian left the library, empty-handed, still carrying his notebook and pens. I finished the book that afternoon, enjoying it even more than usual because of the ridiculousness of Julian's attempted book heist. The mystery was excellent, and I felt a little extra satisfaction knowing that Julian would have to find his own copy to complete his assignment. That story is over. Imagine thinking your procrastination gives you the right to commandeer someone else's library book. The entitlement of offering to buy public library property from another patron is truly something special. Our next story takes us into truly unhinged territory, where someone decided property lines were just friendly suggestions. My neighbour put a pool ladder over the fence to use my pool. I moved into my current house about 2 years ago, and one of the main reasons I chose this property was the backyard. It's got this beautiful in-ground pool that the previous owners had installed, complete with a deck area and some nice landscaping around it. The pool was a major selling point for me since I love swimming and figured it would be great for entertaining friends during the summer. My next-door neighbour is a guy named Clint who has 3 kids under the age of 12. Nice enough family. We'd wave to each other over the fence, make small talk about the weather when we were both doing yard work. His kids seemed well behaved, and I didn't anticipate any problems when I moved in. The first summer I lived there, everything was normal. I'd use my pool in the evenings after work and on weekends, kept it clean and maintained, enjoyed having my own little backyard oasis. Clint's kids would sometimes look over the fence when they heard me swimming, but that seemed natural enough. Kids are curious about pools. This past summer, though, things got weird. I started noticing that the water level in my pool seemed to be dropping faster than usual. Not dramatically, but enough that I was having to add water more frequently than I remembered from the previous year. I figured maybe there was a small leak somewhere, or maybe the hot weather was causing more evaporation than normal. Then I started finding things in my pool that definitely didn't belong to me. Pool toys that weren't mine, a pair of kids' goggles floating in the deep end, even a deflated beach ball that I'd never seen before. At first I thought maybe these items were blowing over from other yards, but some of them seemed too heavy to be wind carried. The real revelation came on a Tuesday afternoon when I decided to leave work early and surprise myself with some midday pool time. I pulled into my driveway around 2 o'clock, grabbed my swim gear and headed straight to the backyard without going inside the house first. That's when I discovered Clint's entire family in my pool. All 3 kids were swimming around. Clint was sitting on the edge with his feet in the water, and his wife was lounging in one of my pool chairs reading a magazine. They had brought their own towels, snacks, and apparently had been there for a while, based on how settled in they looked. I stood there for a moment in complete shock, wondering if I was having some kind of hallucination. These people were using my pool like it was their own personal vacation resort. "Oh, hey, neighbour," Clint called out when he spotted me, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "Hope you don't mind, the kids were really hot, and your pool looked so refreshing." I asked him how exactly they'd gotten into my backyard, since my fence is 6 feet tall and the gate is always locked. Clint pointed to a ladder that was propped against the fence between our properties. "Just borrowed one of my extension ladders. Figured you wouldn't mind sharing the pool on such a hot day. You climbed over my fence to use my pool without asking. The kids really wanted to swim, and you weren't home, so we figured it would be fine. We're being careful with your property." I explained that regardless of how careful they were being, they were trespassing on my property and using my pool without permission. I asked them to get out immediately. Clint's wife looked annoyed, like I was being unreasonable. "It's just a pool," she said. "It's not like we're hurting anything. It's my pool, on my property, and you didn't ask permission." One of their kids, probably about 8 years old, started crying because they didn't want to get out of the water. Clint tried to use this as emotional leverage, saying it would be cruel to disappoint the children when they were having such a good time. I told him that disappointing his children was not my responsibility, and that if he wanted them to have pool access, he should install his own pool or take them to a public swimming facility. "Do you know how much pools cost?" Clint asked, like this justified using mine without permission. "Yes, I do, because I bought a house with one." After about 10 minutes of back and forth, Clint's family finally got out of my pool, but they acted like I was being the unreasonable neighbour. They packed up their stuff with exaggerated sighs and comments about how some people don't understand community spirit. I figured that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The next day, I came home from work to find wet footprints on my pool deck and evidence that someone had been swimming again. The pool toys were back, and my pool chemicals were all messed up like several people had been in the water. I decided to install a security camera pointed at the pool area. What I captured over the next week was unbelievable. Clint and his family were using my pool almost daily, always when they thought I wasn't home. They'd set up that ladder, climb over the fence and spend hours swimming and lounging like they owned the place. The footage showed them bringing their own pool equipment, using my outdoor shower to rinse off, even adjusting my pool furniture to their liking. They were treating my backyard like their private club. When I confronted Clint with the video evidence, he seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset about it. "We've been keeping it clean," he said. "We even skimmed some leaves out yesterday." I told him that cleaning my pool didn't give him permission to use it, and that what he was doing was trespassing and could result in serious legal consequences if someone got injured on my property. "You're really going to call the police over some neighbourly pool sharing?" "I'm going to call the police about trespassing if it happens again." Clint argued that good neighbours should share resources, that his kids deserve to enjoy summer just like anyone else, and that I was being selfish by keeping the pool to myself when I wasn't even home most of the day. I explained that ownership of property doesn't require constant use to be valid, and that his children's enjoyment wasn't my responsibility. I also pointed out the liability issues if one of his kids got hurt in my pool. The final straw came when I discovered that Clint had been giving his neighbours, other families in the area, permission to use my pool as well. I came home one Saturday to find a full-blown pool party happening in my backyard with people I'd never seen before. That's when I called the police. The officer who responded was amazed by the situation and explained to everyone that using someone else's property without permission, even if no damage was done, was still trespassing. Clint received a formal warning, and I had to install additional security measures, including a taller fence and better locks to prevent future unauthorized access. The relationship with my neighbours has been frosty ever since, but at least I can use my own pool without finding strangers in it. That story is over, Installing a ladder to climb into someone else's backyard for daily pool sessions takes neighbourhood entitlement to Olympic levels. The idea that you can just grant pool privileges to the entire block using someone else's property is genuinely mind-blowing. Speaking of workplace situations that make you question humanity, this next story involves a co-worker with a very creative approach to accountability. My co-worker tried to swap name tags to blame me for their mistakes. I work at a large retail electronics store, and part of our uniform includes name tags that clearly identify us to customers. It's pretty standard stuff. Helps customers know who they're talking to, and makes it easier for management to track performance and customer interactions. My co-worker Dana has always been one of those people who somehow manages to avoid responsibility for anything that goes wrong. When shipments are missing items, it's never her fault. When customers complain about poor service, she always has an excuse about why it wasn't really her responsibility. I've worked with people like this before, so I just tried to focus on my own work and not get involved in her drama. Last month we had this particularly difficult customer situation. A guy came in looking for a specific model of laptop that we'd advertised on sale, but it turned out we were completely sold out. This happens sometimes with popular items, and usually customers are understanding when you explain the situation and offer alternatives. But this customer was not understanding. He started yelling about false advertising, demanding to speak to managers, threatening to report us to corporate. The whole interaction went on for about 20 minutes and got increasingly heated as time went on. I was helping another customer on the other side of the store when this was happening, so I only caught bits and pieces of the argument. From what I could hear, it sounded like whoever was helping the angry customer was not handling the situation well, probably making it worse by being defensive instead of apologetic. Eventually, the customer stormed out, still shouting about how he was going to leave terrible reviews and never shop here again. The whole store kind of fell silent after he left. That uncomfortable quiet you get after witnessing someone's public meltdown. I didn't think much more about it until the next morning when my manager pulled me into her office first thing. She had this serious expression that immediately made me nervous. "We need to talk about yesterday's incident with the laptop customer," she said. I told her I'd witnessed some of the argument but hadn't been directly involved since I was helping someone else at the time. "According to the customer complaints we received, you were the employee who handled the situation poorly and refused to offer any solutions or alternatives." I was confused. I explained again that I'd been on the other side of the store with a different customer during the entire incident, that I'd never even spoken to the angry laptop customer. My manager looked at her notes. "The customer specifically mentioned your name, said you were rude and unhelpful, that you told him it wasn't your problem that we were out of stock. And that's when it clicked. I asked my manager to check the security footage from yesterday to verify where I was during the time of the incident. She seemed surprised by my request, but agreed to pull up the video. The footage clearly showed me, at the computer accessories section, helping an elderly woman pick out a mouse and keyboard, nowhere near the laptop displays where the argument was taking place. You could see Dana at the laptop section, dealing with an increasingly agitated customer. But here's where it got weird. My manager paused the video and pointed at Dana. "She's not wearing a name tag in this footage." We watched more carefully, and it became clear that Dana was indeed not wearing any name tag during her interaction with the difficult of our uniform policy, but customer. This was a violation. It also meant the customer couldn't have gotten her name to include in his complaint. My manager had me come in early the next day so we could review more security footage, this time focusing on the break room and employee areas. What we discovered was unbelievable. The cameras showed Dana coming into the break room after the laptop incident, clearly upset and agitated. She went to the employee lockers, where we keep our personal items, opened my locker and took out my spare name tag that I keep there in case I lose my regular one. Then she went back out to the sales floor wearing my name tag and continued working her shift. The customer who filed the complaint must have seen my name and associated it with the poor service he'd received earlier. When my manager confronted Dana about this the next day, Dana tried to claim it was an innocent mistake. She said she'd forgotten her name tag that morning and borrowed mine, not realizing it would cause any problems. But the timeline didn't make sense. The security footage showed her working the entire morning without any name tag, only putting mine on after the difficult customer interaction. If she'd genuinely forgotten her name tag, why hadn't she borrowed mine at the beginning of her shift? When pressed for a better explanation, Dana finally admitted that she deliberately worn my name tag after the customer incident because she was worried about getting in trouble for how she'd handled the situation. I panicked, she said. The customer was so angry, and I knew management would want to know who dealt with him. I thought if he complained, it would be better if it wasn't connected to my name. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dana had basically tried to frame me for her poor customer service by wearing my identification after the fact. My manager was equally appalled. She explained to Dana that attempting to shift blame to another employee by using their name tag was a serious violation of company policy and could result in immediate termination. Dana tried to argue that it wasn't that serious, that she was just trying to avoid getting written up, that everyone makes mistakes when dealing with difficult customers. But my manager pointed out that Dana's mistake wasn't just poor customer service, it was deliberately trying to make another employee take responsibility for her actions. The resolution was that Dana received a formal reprimand and had to write an apology letter to me, acknowledging what she'd done. She also had to call the customer who'd complained and correct the record about which employee had actually helped him. The whole experience made me realize how far some people will go to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. It's one thing to make mistakes at work, but it's another thing entirely to try to blame those mistakes on innocent co-workers. I ended up getting my locker changed and started keeping my spare name tag at home instead of at work, just to prevent any future identity theft situations. That story is over. Stealing someone's identity badge to pin your customer service disasters on them is workplace sabotage at its finest. The premeditation required to swap name tags after a complaint shows this wasn't panic, it was calculated cowardice. Now let's dive into a story that takes laundromat etiquette and throws it completely out the window. A stranger took my laundry out of the dryer and wore it. I live in an apartment building that doesn't have washers and dryers in the units, so I rely on the laundromat about 3 blocks away for all my laundry needs. It's not my favourite chore, but the place is usually pretty quiet, and I've never had any problems with other customers or missing clothes. Last Sunday I loaded up my laundry basket and headed over around 10 in the morning, figuring it would be a good time to avoid the weekend crowds. I had a pretty standard load, nothing fancy, just jeans, t-shirts, a few sweaters, and some undergarments. One of the sweaters was this really nice burgundy cardigan I'd gotten for Christmas, soft wool blend, probably the most expensive piece of clothing I own. The washing went fine, no issues there. I moved everything to the dryers, added my quarters, and set the timer for an hour. The laundromat has these plastic chairs where you can sit and wait, but I decided to grab coffee from the shop next door, since I had plenty of time. When I came back about 50 minutes later, I could see that my dryer had finished its cycle. I walked over expecting to unload my warm, clean clothes and head home. But when I opened the dryer door, it was completely empty. I stood there staring into the empty machine, trying to figure out what had happened. Maybe I'd used a different dryer. I checked the 3 other machines, but none of them contained my clothes. I looked around the laundromat, thinking maybe someone had helpfully moved my stuff to a basket, but I didn't see my clothes anywhere. That's when I noticed a woman folding laundry at one of the tables near the back of the laundromat. She was probably in her 30s, had long dark hair, and was wearing what looked exactly like my burgundy cardigan. I walked over to get a closer look, and sure enough, She was folding what appeared to be my jeans. My specific jeans, including a pair with a distinctive small bleach stain on the left knee that I'd gotten from cleaning my bathroom. "Excuse me," I said. "I think you have my clothes." The woman, who I later learned was named Mara, looked up from her folding. "These are mine," she said simply. "That's my cardigan you're wearing, and those are definitely my jeans you're folding." Mara glanced down at the cardigan like she was seeing it for the first time. "This old thing? I've had this for years." I pointed to the jeans with the bleach stain. "And I suppose you've had those for years too?" "Yeah, I got that stain doing housework last month." The brazenness of her lies was almost impressive. She was literally wearing my stolen clothing while folding the rest of my stolen laundry and claiming it all belonged to her. I told her I knew exactly which dryer my clothes had been in, that I had the receipts with the machine number and time, and that I could describe every item in that load. "Prove it," Mara said, continuing to fold my jeans. So I started listing items: the burgundy cardigan she was wearing, the jeans with the bleach stain, a blue t-shirt with a small hole near the hem, a pair of black pants with a broken belt loop. As I described each item, Mara's expression got more uncomfortable, but she kept insisting everything belonged to her. "Lots of people have similar clothes," she said, "not with the exact same wear patterns and stains." That's when Mara tried a different approach. She said maybe we'd both brought similar items to the laundromat, and there had been some kind of mix-up. She suggested we could sort through everything together and figure out what belonged to whom. Except she wasn't suggesting this as a genuine solution. She was clearly stalling, trying to figure out how to get out of the situation while keeping as much of my clothing as possible. I told her there was no mix-up, that she had taken my clothes out of the dryer and was now trying to steal them. I suggested she return everything immediately before I called the police. "You're going to call the police over laundry?" Mara laughed. "They have better things to do. Theft is theft regardless of what's being stolen." Mara seemed to realise that I was serious about involving law enforcement. She started taking off the cardigan, but slowly, like she was hoping I'd change my mind and let her keep it. "Fine, but I still think this is my sweater," she said, handing it over reluctantly. As she removed the cardigan, I could see the size tag inside, which was clearly visible and matched my size exactly. I pointed this out to her. "I wear different sizes depending on the brand," she said, still trying to maintain her story. I gathered up the rest of my clothes from her folding table, checking each item to make sure it was actually mine. Everything was there except for one pair of underwear, which I decided wasn't worth fighting about, given how weird the situation had already become. As I was loading my clothes back into my basket, Mara made one final attempt to keep something. She claimed that one of my t-shirts was actually hers, that we must have accidentally swapped at some point during the confrontation. I told her I'd been keeping track of every item, and that she wasn't getting to keep anything that belonged to me. The other customers in the laundromat had been watching this entire exchange, and several of them were clearly on my side. One older gentleman came over and told Mara that what she was doing was wrong, and that she should be ashamed of herself. Mara gathered up what appeared to be her actual laundry, which was a much smaller load than what she'd been folding when I first saw her, and left the laundromat without another word. I finished folding my recovered clothes and headed home, but the whole experience left me feeling violated. Someone had gone through my personal belongings, tried on my clothing, and attempted to steal everything I owned. I've started staying in the laundromat for the entire wash and dry cycle now, which is annoying and time-consuming, but I don't trust that this won't happen again with someone else. That story is over. Wearing someone's stolen cardigan while folding their stolen clothes and insisting everything belongs to you requires a level of shamelessness that's truly breathtaking. Some people really think possession equals ownership, even when they're caught red-handed in someone else's sweater. Our next tale involves family drama that reaches new heights of inappropriate timing. My family member demanded to propose at my graduation. I graduated from nursing school last spring after 4 years of incredibly hard work. It was a huge milestone for me, not just academically, but personally. since I'd changed career paths in my late 20s and had to work full-time while taking classes to support myself through the program. My graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in May, and I was really excited about it. My parents were flying in from across the country. My brother was driving up from 2 states away, and several close friends had asked for time off work to attend. It felt amazing to have so much support for something I'd worked so hard to achieve. About 2 weeks before graduation, my cousin Felix called me with what he described as an exciting idea. Felix has always been the type of person who thinks every family gathering should revolve around him somehow, but I figured he was just calling to confirm his attendance or ask about parking arrangements. "I've been thinking about your graduation," he said, "and I realise it's going to be perfect timing for something I've been planning." I asked him what he meant, and that's when Felix dropped his bombshell. He'd been dating his girlfriend Monica for about 8 months and had decided he wanted to propose to her. His brilliant idea was to do it at my graduation ceremony. "Think about it," he said, like he was presenting some kind of genius marketing strategy. "Everyone's already going to be there, everyone's already in a celebratory mood, and all the attention is already focused on family achievements. It's like the perfect setup for a proposal." I stared at my phone in disbelief. "Felix, it's my graduation. The attention is supposed to be focused on my achievement." "Right, and then we can transition that positive energy into Monica's proposal moment. It'll be like a double celebration." I explained to Felix that graduation ceremonies are specifically designed to honour the graduates, that there are protocols and schedules that don't allow for random personal events, and that it would be completely inappropriate to hijack someone else's milestone for a marriage proposal. "I'm not hijacking anything," Felix protested. "I'm just adding to the celebration. Monica loves you. She'd be thrilled to share this special day with you." "Did you ask Monica if she wants to get engaged at someone else's graduation?" Felix admitted that he hadn't discussed the specifics with Monica, but he was sure she'd love the surprise. He kept emphasizing how romantic it would be, how memorable, how much money he'd save on having to plan a separate proposal event. I told him absolutely not, that my graduation was not the appropriate venue for his proposal, and that he needed to plan something separate that would give Monica the individual attention she deserved for such an important moment. "You're being really selfish about this," Felix said. "It's not like a proposal would take away from your graduation. If anything, it would make the day more special for everyone." I pointed out that Monica's engagement should be about her, not about conveniently timing it to coincide with someone else's event. I also mentioned that graduation ceremonies typically have strict schedules and security protocols that wouldn't allow for unplanned disruptions. Felix argued that he could propose during the reception afterward, or maybe during the family dinner we'd planned for that evening. He seemed to think that as long as it wasn't during the actual diploma ceremony, it would be perfectly acceptable. "The entire day is about celebrating my graduation," I told him. "The ceremony, the reception, the dinner, all of it. You can propose to Monica any other day of the year." "But everyone's already going to be together," Felix whined. "Do you know how hard it is to get the whole family in one place? This is efficient planning." I explained that efficient planning shouldn't come at the expense of other people's special moments, and that Monica deserved a proposal that was planned specifically for her, not one that was piggybacking on someone else's achievement. Felix spent the next 20 minutes trying different arguments. He suggested it would be a beautiful family story, that people would remember my graduation as the day Felix proposed. He offered to mention me in his proposal speech, like that would somehow make it appropriate. He even tried to argue that I owed him this favour because he'd driven to my high school graduation years earlier. When none of his arguments worked, Felix got angry and accused me of being jealous that he was in a relationship while I was single. He said I was trying to sabotage his happiness because I couldn't stand seeing other people find love. I hung up on him at that point, but Felix wasn't done. Over the next week, he called other family members to complain about my unreasonable refusal to let him propose at my graduation. He painted it as me being controlling and selfish, conveniently leaving out the part where he wanted to hijack my celebration for his own purposes. Several relatives called me to ask about the situation, and when I explained Felix's actual plan, they were all appalled. My aunt, Felix's mother, was particularly mortified and promised to talk to him about appropriate timing for proposals. Felix eventually proposed to Monica at a restaurant the week after my graduation, and from what I heard, she was thrilled with the intimate setting and personal attention. Apparently, she'd had no idea about Felix's original plan and was horrified when she learned about it later. My graduation day was perfect, exactly as it should have been. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception was fun, and the family dinner was a lovely celebration of my nursing degree. No one tried to commandeer the day for their own personal agenda. Felix and I didn't speak for several months after the graduation incident, though we've since reconciled. He never did apologize for trying to steal my spotlight, but at least he didn't actually follow through on his terrible plan. That story is over. Planning to propose at someone else's graduation because everyone's already there is peak lazy romanticism wrapped in selfish opportunism. Monica deserved so much better than being someone's efficiency-minded afterthought at a nursing ceremony. Our next story takes us into workplace territory that can only be described as biological warfare. My co-worker put raw fish in the office plant's soil. I work in a typical corporate office environment. 30-person team, open floor plan, the usual setup with cubicles and a few communal areas. We've got several large potted plants scattered around the office that are supposed to improve air quality and make the workspace more pleasant. Most people barely notice them, they're just part of the background decoration. My co-worker Brent sits about 2 cubicles away from me, and he's always been one of those guys who thinks he knows better than everyone else about pretty much everything. He's constantly sharing unsolicited advice about productivity, diet, exercise, life optimization, that kind of thing. Mostly harmless, just annoying. About 6 weeks ago, Brent started bringing elaborate lunches to work. Not just regular meals, but these complex dishes that he'd clearly spent a lot of time preparing. Salmon fillets, whole fish, exotic preparations that made the break room smell like a seafood market. I figured he was on some kind of health kick, trying to eat more omega-3s or whatever. The problem started on a Tuesday morning when I walked into the office and was hit by this overwhelming smell. Not cooking fish, not fresh fish, but something much worse. Like fish that had been sitting in the sun for days, mixed with soil and something else I couldn't identify. At first, I thought maybe there was a problem with the building's ventilation system, or perhaps something had died in the walls. The smell seemed strongest near the large fiddle leaf fig plant that sits between my cubicle and Brent's. By lunchtime, the smell had gotten so bad that people were complaining to HR. Several co-workers mentioned feeling nauseous, and one person actually went home sick claiming the odour was giving her headaches. Building maintenance came to investigate, checking for gas leaks, dead rodents, plumbing issues, anything that might explain the horrible smell. They couldn't find a source, but they did notice that the smell seemed concentrated around the office plants. That's when someone suggested checking the plant soil. When maintenance dug into the fiddle leaf figs pot, they found chunks of raw fish buried about 3 inches down. Not just small pieces, but substantial portions of salmon, tuna, and what looked like whole sardines. The discovery was so bizarre that maintenance called our office manager over to witness it. As they dug deeper, they found layers of decomposing fish that had been buried in the soil over what appeared to be several weeks. The smell when they exposed all this rotting seafood was indescribable. Several people had to leave the floor entirely, and building maintenance had to bring in industrial fans to air out the area. That's when I remembered seeing Brent near the plants during lunch breaks, supposedly watering them or adjusting their position near the windows. I thought he was just being helpful, taking care of the office greenery. When our office manager questioned the team about who might know something about fish in the plant soil, Brent immediately spoke up with what he clearly thought was a reasonable explanation. I was fertilizing the plants, he said, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. Fish makes excellent natural fertilizer. It's organic, sustainable, way better than those chemical plant foods. Our office manager stared at him. You buried raw fish in the office plants? Fish emulsion fertilizer is a real thing, Brent insisted. I was just making my own version. It's supposed to be great for plant growth. I pointed out that fish emulsion fertilizer is processed, not just raw fish chunks buried in potting soil. Brent waved off this distinction like it was a minor technicality. The principle is the same, he said. Decomposing organic matter provides nutrients for plant roots. I was saving the office money on fertilizer while giving these plants the nutrition they needed. Our office manager explained that regardless of his intentions, burying rotting fish in office plants was creating a health hazard and making the workplace uninhabitable for everyone else. I didn't think it would smell this much, Brent admitted. I buried it pretty deep, figured it would just decompose quietly and feed the plants. What made you think this was a good idea? Brent launched into this explanation about how indigenous peoples used to bury fish with their crops, how it was a traditional farming technique, how modern people had just forgotten these natural methods in favor of processed chemicals. He seemed genuinely confused by everyone's negative reaction to his organic fertilizer experiment. In his mind, he'd been doing the office a favor by improving the plant care while disposing of his leftover lunch fish in an environmentally conscious way. The cleanup process took 3 days. Maintenance had to remove all the soil from every plant in the office because it turned out Brent had been fertilizing multiple plants over the course of several weeks. They found fish remains in the peace lily, the snake plant, even the small succulents on the windowsills. The plants themselves had to be quarantined and treated to prevent any contamination or pest issues. Several of them didn't survive the trauma of having their root systems exposed to decomposing seafood for weeks. Brent was required to reimburse the company for the cost of new plants, new soil, and the extensive cleaning process. He also had to attend a workplace conduct seminar about appropriate behaviour in shared office environments. The smell lingered for almost 2 weeks, despite industrial cleaning efforts. People were working from home when possible, and we had to keep all the windows open constantly to air out the space. Brent seemed genuinely surprised by the consequences of his fertilizer experiment. He kept insisting that his method would have worked if people had just given it more time, that everyone was overreacting to a natural process. He eventually stopped bringing fish lunches to work, switching to sandwiches and salads that he couldn't repurpose as plant fertilizer. But he still occasionally makes comments about how the office plants don't look as healthy as they did when he was properly feeding them. That story is over. Turning the office into your personal composting experiment with raw fish takes workplace initiative to horrifying new levels. The confidence required to defend burying rotting salmon in communal plants as organic fertilizer is genuinely impressive. Our final story tonight involves someone who decided that property improvement projects don't require permission from actual property owners. My neighbour cut a hole in my fence to make a shortcut. I've been living in my current house for about 3 years, and one of the things I love about the property is the privacy it offers. I have a 6-foot wooden fence that runs along the back and side boundaries of my yard, creating a nice enclosed space where I can relax, garden, and let my dog run around without worrying about him getting into neighbours' yards. My neighbour Olivia lives behind me, and her property backs up to mine, along about 50 feet of shared fence line. She's always seemed friendly enough, waves when she sees me working in the garden, makes small talk about the weather when we're both outside. I figured we had a pretty standard neighbourly relationship. Olivia's house sits on a corner lot, which means she has street access from 2 directions, but apparently, walking around the block to get from her backyard to the front street is more inconvenient than she thought it should be. Last month, I was inside working when I heard some kind of construction noise coming from my backyard. Power tools, hammering, the sound of wood being cut. I figured maybe Olivia was doing some home improvement project on her side of the fence. The noise went on for about an hour, then stopped. I didn't think much more about it until the next morning when I let my dog out and noticed something that made me do a double take. There was a neat rectangular hole cut in my fence, about 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall like a doorway. The cut was clean and precise, clearly done with proper tools by someone who knew what they were doing. I walked over to examine it more closely, and that's when I saw Olivia in her backyard waving at me like nothing unusual had happened. "Morning, neighbour," she called out cheerfully. "Hope the construction noise yesterday wasn't too bothersome." I pointed at the hole in my fence. "Did you cut this?" "Just making a little shortcut," she said, like this was the most reasonable home improvement project in the world. Walking around the whole block to get to the front street was taking forever, especially when I'm carrying groceries or garden supplies. I stared at her in disbelief. "You cut a hole in my fence without asking me?" "It's right on the property line," Olivia said. "Technically, it's half your fence and half my fence, so I figured it was okay to modify my half." I explained that regardless of property lines, you don't alter shared structures without discussing it with the other property owner first. I also pointed out that the hole she'd cut compromised the privacy and security that the fence was supposed to provide. "You can always close it up on your side if you want," Olivia suggested. "I just needed access from my side." "That's not how this works. You can't just cut holes in fences and expect other people to deal with the consequences." Olivia seemed genuinely puzzled by my objection. She said the hole was neat and clean, that she'd been careful not to damage the fence posts, and that it actually improved both our properties by making them more accessible. I told her that I wanted the hole repaired immediately, that I hadn't consented to having a doorway between our yards. "Why would you want to repair it?" she asked. "This way, we can borrow things from each other more easily. Chat over the fence, be better neighbours." Because I wanted a fence between our properties, not a door. Olivia suggested we could install an actual door in the opening, maybe something with a lock that we both had keys to. She offered to split the cost of materials if I was worried about the expense. I explained that I didn't want any kind of opening in my fence, that the whole point of having a fence was to create separation between our properties. "You're being really antisocial about this," Olivia said. "Most people would be happy to have a more connected neighbourhood. Most people ask permission before cutting holes in other people's fences." That's when Olivia revealed that she'd been planning this project for months. She'd measured the fence, researched the property lines, even bought special tools for making clean cuts in wood. This wasn't some impulsive decision. It was a calculated modification of shared property without consent. I told her she had 1 week to repair the fence properly, or I'd hire someone to fix it and send her the bill. Olivia argued that I was being unreasonable, that the hole was an improvement to both properties and that I should be thanking her for the free labour instead of complaining about it. "I never asked you to cut a hole in our fence. You never said I couldn't." The logic was so twisted I didn't even know how to respond. According to Olivia, the absence of a specific prohibition against fence modification meant she had permission to do whatever she wanted. I ended up having to call the city about property line disputes and fence regulations. They confirmed that modifying shared fences requires agreement from both property owners, and that Olivia was legally required to restore the fence to its original condition. When a city inspector came out to look at the situation, he was amazed by the neat precision of Olivia's unauthorised construction project. "I've seen a lot of fence disputes," he told me, "but I've never seen someone cut such a perfect doorway without permission." Olivia was issued a violation and given 30 days to repair the fence. She complied, but grudgingly, and she made sure to tell all our neighbours about how unreasonable I was being about a minor property improvement. The repair work was professional, and you can barely tell where the hole used to be. But Olivia still occasionally comments about how convenient that shortcut would have been, and how some people just don't understand community cooperation. That story is over. Creating your own personal highway through someone else's fence because walking around the block is too inconvenient shows a special kind of entitlement. The months of planning required to execute such a precise, unauthorized door installation makes it even more unbelievable. These stories remind us that we're all sharing this world with people who operate on completely different sets of rules and assumptions. Whether it's neighbours who think your property is community property, co-workers who believe normal workplace etiquette doesn't apply to them, or strangers who assume their needs automatically outweigh everyone else's. There's no shortage of encounters that make you question whether some people ever learned the basics of living in civilized society. The internet gives us this incredible window into experiences we might never believe if we hadn't heard them straight from the people who lived through them. Sometimes the most unbelievable part isn't what people do, but how confidently they defend their actions afterward, as if the rest of us are the ones who don't understand how the world works. If you're still listening at this point, you probably understand that some of the best stories come from the most ordinary situations where extraordinary entitlement decides to make an appearance. Whether you're unwinding after a long day or just need something in the background while you're building that castle in Minecraft, these next few stories will definitely make you appreciate the boundaries in your own life. Let's dive into some encounters that prove common sense isn't actually that common. Our next story comes from someone who discovered their friend has a very creative definition of property exchange. My friend tried to replace their broken TV with mine. I've been friends with Hank for about 7 years now, and he's always been the kind of guy who finds creative solutions to his problems. Usually, this works out fine, like when he figured out how to fix my car's rattling dashboard with a strategically placed rubber band, or when he helped me move apartments using nothing but a pickup truck and sheer determination. But last month, Hank's problem-solving skills took a turn that I definitely didn't see coming. It started when he texted me complaining about his TV situation. His 42-inch flat screen had developed this massive crack right down the middle of the screen, apparently from his roommates accidentally throwing a controller during a particularly intense gaming session. The TV still worked technically, but half the screen was basically unwatchable, with all the distorted colours and black lines running through it. I sympathise with him because I know how expensive TVs are, and Hank's always been pretty tight on money. He works part-time at a warehouse and picks up odd jobs when he can, so a sudden several $100 expense wasn't really in his budget. I'm just going to have to live with it for a while, he told me. Maybe save up over the next few months and get something used. I felt bad for him, but I also had my own finances to worry about. So I just told him to check Facebook Marketplace for deals and left it at that. Last Wednesday, I had to leave town unexpectedly for a work conference that got moved up at the last minute. I was gone for 3 days, staying in hotels, attending meetings, the usual business trip routine. I'd given Hank my spare key months ago so he could water my plants and grab my mail when I travelled, which had always worked out perfectly in the past. When I got home Friday evening, I was exhausted and just wanted to collapse on my couch and watch some mindless television. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into my usual spot, and reached for the remote. Well, there you have it. Another collection of stories that make you wonder how some people make it through daily life without getting themselves arrested or banned from every establishment in town. From neighbours who think your garage is a community resource centre to co-workers who turn office plants into seafood graveyards. These encounters remind us that the world is full of people operating on completely different wavelengths. The amazing thing about these stories is that they're all real. Somewhere out there, people are still dealing with the aftermath of having their fence turned into a custom doorway, or their graduation almost hijacked by someone else's proposal plans. These aren't fictional characters dreamed up for entertainment. They're your actual neighbours, co-workers, and random strangers who somehow convince themselves that their logic makes perfect sense. If these stories helped you unwind tonight, or at least made you feel better about your own life situations, then they've done their job. Sweet dreams. And here's hoping your tomorrow is filled with people who understand basic boundaries and common courtesy.